My mother-in-law pointed her manicured finger at me from the gallery. "She is faking it," she announced to the silent courtroom. Beside me, my husband smirked, adjusting his custom suit. "She pulls this every time she does not get her way, Your Honor." The judge looked down at me, his skepticism heavy, his gavel raised to strip me of everything I had ever built. But before the wood could strike the sounding block, my legs gave out. I hit the hardwood floor. As my vision faded, the heavy oak doors crashed open. A military doctor in full dress uniform sprinted down the aisle, shoving past the bailiffs. "Your Honor, she needs help," he commanded. "Call 911. Everyone froze, and my husband's smug smile vanished forever. "My name is Tasha. I am 35 years old and a senior data analyst for a healthcare tech firm. Before I tell you how a courtroom ambush turned into the ultimate reckoning, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to fight for your sanity against the people who swore to love you." The air inside the Fulton County Courthouse was suffocatingly thick, heavy with the smell of lemon floor wax, old paper, and the expensive cedar cologne my husband always wore. I sat at the plaintiff table, my hands gripping the edge of the heavy mahogany wood so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Sweat beaded at my hairline, and a violent tremor shook my fingers. I was trying with every ounce of willpower I possessed simply to stay upright in my wooden chair. For the past 8 months, a mysterious, debilitating illness had been slowly draining the life out of me. The doctors could not find a cause, and the constant physical weakness had left me a shadow of the fiercely independent woman I used to be. My legs felt like they were filled with wet sand, and a persistent cloudy fog wrapped around my brain, making it difficult to process the words echoing across the courtroom. Sitting just a few feet away from me was Jamal, my husband of 7 years. He was 38 years old, a highly successful investment banker, and he looked absolutely flawless. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that tailored perfectly to his athletic build, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle silk tie. Not a single hair was out of place. He sat with his hands neatly folded on the table, projecting an aura of calm, collected sorrow. He was playing the role of the exhausted, patient husband to absolute perfection. To the judge, to the bailiffs, to anyone watching, Jamal looked like a saint who had reached his breaking point, dealing with a mentally unstable wife. Only I knew the cold, calculating monster hiding behind that charismatic smile. Just behind the wooden partition separating the gallery from the court floor sat Brenda, Jamal's mother. She was 60 years old, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit, sitting with the rigid, judgmental posture of a seasoned church mother ready to condemn a sinner. Her eyes bored into the back of my head, sharp and unforgiving. Brenda had never liked me. I was too independent, too career-focused, and I made more money than her precious son when we first got married. Now that I was sick and vulnerable, she was reveling in my downfall. I could feel her dark, triumphant energy radiating from the gallery, a silent cheerleading section for her son's campaign to destroy me. Jamal's attorney, a ruthless man with a sharp voice and a predatory stance, was pacing in front of the judge's bench. He was methodically, brutally tearing my life apart piece by piece. "Your Honor," the attorney said, his voice ringing through the quiet room, "my client has endured unimaginable stress over the past 8 months. As you can see from the medical records submitted to the court, dozens of specialists have examined Mrs. Sterling. None of them have found any physical biological cause for her reported symptoms." The attorney paused for dramatic effect, turning slowly to look at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. "What we are dealing with here, Your Honor, is a tragic case of severe psychological instability. My client's wife has manufactured phantom illnesses. She suffers from frequent episodes of hysteria. She has neglected her duties as a wife, abandoned her professional responsibilities, and created a hostile, unpredictable environment in their home. Because of her deteriorating mental state, we are asking the court to grant my client full control over the marital assets." I sat there, my breath hitching in my throat, listening to them legally erase my sanity. The assets they were talking about were not just random joint accounts. They were asking for full ownership of our $1.2 million townhouse in Atlanta. That was the home I had paid the entire down payment for using the bonuses I earned during my years working as a military contractor. I had spent countless weekends picking out the fixtures, designing the layout, turning that house into a sanctuary. Now Jamal wanted to kick me out of it, claiming I was too mentally incompetent to maintain the property. Even worse, they were going after my stock portfolio. For a decade, working as a senior data analyst, I had painstakingly researched and built a robust portfolio of tech stocks. It was my financial safety net, the result of my own sweat intellect and relentless hard work. Jamal, despite being an investment banker, had notoriously bad spending habits, constantly buying luxury cars and funding his mother's lavish lifestyle. He had contributed almost nothing to that specific portfolio. Yet his lawyer stood there boldly demanding that the judge transfer my entire life savings into Jamal's name under the guise of protecting the funds from my supposed erratic behavior. They are trying to strip me of everything I have ever built. I thought the realization hitting me like a physical blow. They are using my illness, this terrifying weakness that I cannot control, to rob me blind. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam my hands on the table and demand justice. But my throat felt tight, and my tongue felt swollen, coated in a strange metallic taste that had been lingering in my mouth for weeks. The judge, a no-nonsense man named Judge Reynolds, adjusted his glasses and looked down at the paperwork. He frowned, his expression tight with skepticism, as he flipped through the pages of clean medical reports. He then looked over at Jamal. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "These are serious requests. Stripping a spouse of her primary residence and her individually managed financial portfolios requires substantial justification. Are you certain your wife is incapable of managing her own affairs?" Jamal stood up. He did not rush. He moved with a deliberate, agonizingly smooth grace. He buttoned his suit jacket, looked down at the table for a moment, as if gathering his emotional strength, and then looked up at the judge. The performance was sickeningly brilliant. His eyes were wide, filled with a manufactured sadness that made my stomach churn. "Your Honor." Jamal began, his voice smooth, persuasive, and dripping with fake sorrow. "I love my wife. I have tried everything to help her. I have taken over all the cooking, all the cleaning. I make sure she eats every morning. I have brought my mother into our home just to help care for her. But she refuses to accept psychiatric help. She creates these physical symptoms to avoid reality." Jamal let out a heavy, perfectly timed sigh, shaking his head slightly. He then turned slightly, pointing a finger in my direction, flashing a brief, barely visible smirk that only I could see, before his face morphed back into a mask of pity. "She pulls this every time she does not get her way, Your Honor. Whenever she faces stress, she suddenly cannot walk. She cannot think. It is manipulative, and it is destroying our finances and our lives. I just want to protect our future before she burns it all to the ground." From the gallery, Brenda chimed in perfectly on cue. She did not yell, but her voice was loud enough to carry across the quiet courtroom, ensuring the court reporter caught every syllable. "She is faking it. She has been faking it for months just to torture my son." Judge Reynolds banged his gavel lightly, giving Brenda a stern look, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been firmly planted. The judge looked down at me, and I could see it in his eyes. He believed them. He saw a hysterical, broken woman trying to cling to assets she could no longer manage. He raised his gavel, preparing to rule on the temporary injunction that would freeze my accounts and hand the keys to my house over to the man who was smiling at my destruction. I had to do something. I could not sit there and let them steal my life. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table and pushed. I commanded my legs to stand. I needed to address the judge. I needed to look him in the eye and tell him that my husband was a liar, that my illness was real, that I was a brilliant data analyst, and I knew exactly what was in my bank accounts. But as I forced my weight upward, the room violently tilted. The heavy wooden walls of the courthouse seemed to warp and spin around me. A high-pitched ringing pierced my eardrums, drowning out the sound of the lawyer shuffling papers. My vision blurred, the faces of the judge, the bailiffs, and Jamal melting into smeared blobs of color. I managed to rise a few inches out of my chair. "Your Honor," I gasped, my voice sounding weak and frail, barely carrying past my own table. "Please, you have to listen to me." That was as far as I got. The persistent, terrifying numbness that had been living in my calves suddenly rushed up my thighs. My muscles completely gave out, turning to liquid. My knees buckled beneath me. I reached out blindly to grab the table, but my uncoordinated fingers slipped off the polished edge. I hit the hardwood floor hard. The impact sent a shockwave of pain through my shoulder and hip, but I barely felt it through the overwhelming fog consuming my brain. I lay there on the cold, unforgiving floor of the courtroom, my cheek pressed against the wood, unable to move my arms or legs. The ringing in my ears faded, replaced by the sounds of the room reacting to my collapse. I heard Jamal let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. He actually rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go again," he muttered, sounding incredibly bored. From the gallery, Brenda scoffed, her heels clicking against the floor as she shifted in her seat. "Lord have mercy, the theatrics. Does she have no shame?" Judge Reynolds leaned over the bench, looking down at me. I could not see his face clearly, but I heard the irritation in his voice. "Counsel, please get your client up from the floor. We are in the middle of a hearing." My lawyer, a woman who had seemed increasingly doubtful of my case all morning, knelt beside me, her voice hesitant. "Tasha, come on. You have to get up. The judge is losing patience." I tried to speak, to tell her I could not move, that my heart was racing uncontrollably, that I could not breathe. But my lips refused to form the words. The darkness was closing in rapidly, pulling me down into a terrifying void. I realized in that moment that Jamal was going to win. He was going to stand over my paralyzed body, take my home, take my money, and legally discard me. I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping and tracking through the dust on the floor. Then a sound shattered the quiet murmur of the courtroom. The heavy, solid oak doors at the back of the courtroom crashed open with explosive force. The sound was so loud it echoed like a gunshot off the high ceilings. Footsteps, heavy, urgent, and precise, pounded against the wooden aisle. Someone was sprinting directly toward the front of the room. "Ma'am, you cannot enter while court is in session." A bailiff shouted, his heavy boots moving to intercept the intruder. "Stand down," a deep, commanding voice roared back. The voice carried absolute, unquestionable authority. It was a voice trained to give orders in war zones, a voice that demanded immediate compliance. I managed to flutter my eyes open just a fraction. Striding past the wooden partition, physically shoving past a startled bailiff, was Major Malik Sterling. He was 40 years old, a towering, imposing figure dressed in his immaculate, full military dress uniform. The dark fabric contrasted sharply with the vibrant rows of service ribbons and medals pinned to his chest. Major Sterling was a brilliant military doctor and toxicologist, and the commanding officer I had reported to during my years working as a specialized data contractor for the Department of Defense. I had not seen him in nearly 2 years. Sterling did not hesitate. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at Jamal. He dropped straight to his knees on the hard floor right beside me, the pristine fabric of his uniform pants hitting the dust. His large, warm hands immediately went to my neck, his fingers pressing firmly against my carotid artery to check my pulse. He leaned over me, his face close to mine, his eyes scanning my pale, sweating skin, my dilated pupils, the tremor in my jaw. "I am right here, Tasha," he said, his voice dropping to a low, steady rumble meant only for me. "You are safe now. I have got you." He looked up, his jaw, set, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective intensity. He locked eyes with the judge sitting frozen behind the elevated bench. "Your Honor," Major Sterling commanded, his voice slicing through the shocked silence of the room. "This woman is in acute medical distress. Her heart rate is severely elevated and she is showing signs of critical neurological shutdown. She needs help immediately. Call 911 right now." Panic erupted. The structured, formal atmosphere of the courtroom completely shattered. The bailiff who had tried to stop Sterling immediately grabbed the radio on his shoulder and began barking requests for emergency medical services. Judge Reynolds jumped to his feet, dropping his gavel on the desk with a loud clatter, his skepticism entirely replaced by genuine alarm. But the most satisfying moment, the image that would burn itself into my memory forever, was the look on my husband's face. I tilted my head just enough to see Jamal. He was standing by his chair, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. The charismatic, arrogant smirk he had worn just minutes ago had completely vanished. The mask of the patient, exhausted husband had shattered into a million pieces. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He stared at Major Sterling, taking in the military uniform, the medical authority, the absolute certainty with which the stranger had just derailed his perfect plan. Jamal took a step back, bumping into his own lawyer, his eyes darting toward the gallery where Brenda sat completely silent, her jaw hanging open in shock. Major Sterling kept his hand firmly on my pulse, leaning over my body like a human shield. He glanced up at Jamal, his dark eyes narrowing with razor-sharp suspicion. Sterling did not know the whole truth yet, but as a toxicologist looking at my symptoms and then looking at the terrified, sweating man in the custom suit, he knew enough. The distant wail of ambulance sirens began to echo through the downtown Atlanta streets, growing louder by the second. The courtroom doors remained wide open, the cool air rushing in. I closed my eyes again, the darkness finally pulling me under, but for the first time in 8 months, I was not afraid. My husband's carefully constructed web of lies had just been ripped apart, and the reckoning was only just beginning. I woke to the rhythmic, sterile beeping of a heart monitor. The air did not smell like the musty, polished wood of the Fulton County Courthouse. It smelled of sharp antiseptic and crisp linen. My eyelids felt heavy, but as I forced them open, the blurry shapes around me sharpened into the muted gray walls of a secure hospital wing. There were no decorative paintings, no standard hospital chairs. At the far end of the room stood a heavily reinforced door with a digital keypad. Sitting perfectly still in a metal chair beside my bed was Major Malik Sterling. His formal dress uniform was gone, replaced by tactical olive scrubs that made his broad shoulders look even more imposing. He was reviewing a medical tablet, his jaw locked in intense concentration. He sensed my movement before I even made a sound, setting the tablet face down and leaning forward. His dark eyes were razor-sharp, searching my face with a fierce, protective intensity. "You have been unconscious for 2 days," Malik said, his deep voice keeping the panic at bay. I tried to speak, but my throat was painfully dry. He anticipated my need, holding a cup of ice water to my lips and supporting the back of my neck with a warm, steady hand. I swallowed greedily, my mind racing to catch up. The courthouse, the numbness in my legs, Jamal smirking as I collapsed. "Where is my husband?" I managed to whisper the words, scratching against my throat. "Locked out," Malik replied smoothly. "When you collapsed, he tried to assert his medical proxy to have you transferred to a private psychiatric facility in Buckhead. I used your inactive Department of Defense clearance to invoke a federal medical hold. You are in a secured military hospital wing, Tasha. Jamal cannot touch you here. Nobody gets through those doors without my authorization." I sagged against the pillows, a trembling sigh escaping my lungs. But the relief was short-lived. I looked at Malik, reading the grim reality etched into the hard lines of his face. He had pulled my blood work. He had run the toxicology panels that my civilian doctors, the ones Jamal had carefully selected, had completely ignored. Malik leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, steady rumble that commanded my absolute focus. "You are not crazy, Tasha. You have never been crazy. You have been systematically poisoned." The words hit my chest like a physical blow. The absolute relief of finally being believed crashed violently against the horrifying reality of the betrayal. My own husband had been trying to kill me. The man who had held my hand at the altar, the man who kissed my forehead every morning, had been orchestrating my slow, agonizing execution. Triggered by Malik's words, the past 8 months of my life suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The sudden, crippling, dizzy spells that had forced me to take a leave of absence from my data analytics firm were not a mystery illness. The suffocating brain fog that made staring at spreadsheets impossible was not a mental breakdown. It was an assault. I remembered Jamal stepping up playing the devoted caretaker. He insisted on taking over all the cooking. He brought me a custom protein shake every single morning, standing at the foot of the bed watching me drink every last drop. "To keep your strength up, baby," he would say, flashing that charismatic smile while he handed me a cup of literal poison. Then came his mother, Brenda. Jamal moved her into our townhouse, insisting I needed around-the-clock supervision while he was at the investment bank. But Brenda did not supervise, she policed. She isolated me from my friends, turning away visitors at the front door with fake, mournful apologies about my fragile mental state. When the doors were closed, the act dropped. Brenda would stand in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed over her chest, staring down at my weakened body with pure disgust. "A sick wife is a useless wife," she would mutter, snatching away my phone and laptop under the guise of helping me rest. They were building a narrative. They were setting the stage for my complete erasure, ensuring that when my heart finally gave out, everyone would view it as a tragic medical mystery rather than murder. And then there was Chloe. My brother-in-law Trey had married her 3 years ago. Chloe was a white woman who knew exactly how to play the role of the sweet, well-meaning sister-in-law to absolute perfection. When my illness worsened and my mind grew cloudy, Chloe volunteered to manage the household finances and my personal accounts. Jamal praised her generosity, telling me not to worry my pretty head about bills. I was too weak to fight her. But the data analyst in me never fully slept. On the rare days my mind felt somewhat clear, I noticed alarming discrepancies in my bank app. Transfers I had not authorized. Balances that looked tens of thousands of dollars too low. When I mustered the physical strength to confront Chloe about the missing funds, her reaction was immediate and entirely weaponized. She burst into violent, shaking sobs. The tears flowed instantly. She ran to Jamal and Brenda, crying hysterically about how terrified she was of my aggressive paranoia. She played the fragile victim, sobbing about how she was sacrificing her own precious time to help a sick, ungrateful black woman who was attacking her character. Right on cue, Jamal and Brenda rushed to her defense. They cornered me in my own bedroom, shouting about my delusions, screaming that my sickness was turning me into a bitter, paranoid burden. They forced me to apologize to a sobbing Chloe while I sat shivering in my bed. They used her white tears to gaslight me into doubting my own reality, convincing me that the missing money was just another symptom of my failing mind. Looking at Malik, now sitting vigilant beside my hospital bed, the puzzle pieces locked together with brutal, unforgiving clarity. It was not a mental breakdown. It was a coordinated slow-motion execution. My husband, his mother, and his sister-in-law were starving my body of life and bleeding my bank accounts dry. They had manipulated the legal system, isolated me from my support network, and poisoned my daily meals. And they truly thought they had won. They thought I would quietly fade away and leave them my empire. I closed my eyes, feeling the cold, hard truth wash over me, flushing out the fear and the confusion that had paralyzed me for almost a year. The weak, hysterical woman they had so carefully created died on that military hospital bed. The senior data analyst woke up. My tears dried into ice. I opened my eyes and looked at Malik. My voice no longer a fragile whisper, but a quiet, lethal promise. "I am going to destroy them." Malik did not offer empty platitudes or ask if I was sure. He simply nodded his military training, recognizing a shift in the chain of command. I asked him for a secured internet terminal. 10 minutes later, he placed a rugged, matte black tactical laptop on my lap. My fingers were still trembling from the residual effects of whatever toxin they had been feeding me, but the blinding fog that had plagued my mind for nearly a year was finally beginning to lift. Adrenaline and pure, unadulterated rage fueled my focus. Jamal had confiscated my personal computer months ago, claiming the screen time was exacerbating my severe migraines. He had changed my primary banking passwords and locked me out of our shared accounts, assuming my deteriorating mental state would prevent me from noticing. He thought he had outsmarted a sick, helpless woman. He forgot who he married. I ignored the standard banking portals. Instead, I ran a sequence of commands to bypass his lockouts and access a heavily encrypted, decentralized cloud server I had built years ago during my time as a Department of Defense contractor. It was a digital vault that Jamal did not even know existed, constantly pulling read-only backups of every financial institution attached to my Social Security number. The screen illuminated my hospital room with rows of raw financial data. I ran the tracking algorithms I had designed, and the horrifying truth bled across the screen in bright red deficits. Jamal did not just want me dead. He was actively bleeding me dry while he waited for my heart to stop. Over the last 8 months, hundreds of thousands of dollars from the tech stock portfolio I had built before we even met had been systematically gutted. The timeline was impeccably, sickeningly synchronized with my poisoning. Every time my symptoms spiked, every time I had a terrible week and was confined to my bed, massive wire transfers were initiated. While I was upstairs vomiting and losing sensation in my legs, my husband was downstairs liquidating my life savings. He had used his expertise as an investment banker to route the capital through a complex series of newly formed shell companies. He likely assumed his financial maze was completely untraceable to a woman he had convinced the world was going crazy. But to a senior data analyst, his little shell game looked like a child drawing on the walls with a bright red marker. It took me less than 20 minutes to tear through his corporate firewalls and follow the money. The total stolen capital amounted to exactly $400,000. I tracked the final destination of the wire transfers, expecting to find an offshore account or a hidden brokerage fund. Instead, the money trail stopped abruptly at a commercial real estate lease in Buckhead, the most expensive district in Atlanta. I pulled the public records and vendor invoices tied to the holding company. The business was registered as a luxury wellness center. Its name was Core Aura Pilates. The sole proprietor listed on the business license was Chloe Sterling. I sat back against the sterile hospital pillows, the sheer audacity of their betrayal making my blood run cold. Chloe, the same woman who had sat at the edge of my bed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, crying about how exhausting it was to help manage my medical bills. While she was playing the overwhelmed, dedicated sister-in-law to our extended family, she was using my hard-earned tech money to buy imported Italian reformer machines, custom marble reception desks, and an organic smoothie bar for her own vanity business. Jamal was funding his brother's wife's dream using my blood money. The betrayal was incredibly layered, an absolute masterpiece of greed and cruelty. I closed the laptop just as Malik stepped back into the room. He handed me a sealed folder containing the official military toxicology report. The results confirmed everything. Thallium poisoning. It was a heavy metal completely tasteless, completely odorless, and notoriously difficult to detect unless a doctor knew exactly what to look for. It was administered slowly over a long period designed to mimic a degenerative neurological disease. It was the absolute perfect match for the daily protein shakes Jamal so lovingly prepared for me every single morning. Before I could even process the document in my hands, a red light flashed on the secure communication panel mounted to the hospital wall. Malik tapped the screen, listening to a brief audio report from the military police officers stationed at the front desk of the secure wing. He turned to me, his jaw tight. "Your husband is here. He brought his mother. They are at the main checkpoint demanding to see you. Jamal is throwing his weight around, waving his medical proxy paperwork, and threatening to sue the hospital for kidnapping. I can have my men throw them out of the building right now. Just give the word." I looked down at the toxicology report resting on my lap. I looked at the encrypted laptop holding the proof of their massive financial fraud. The old Tasha, the woman who had cried herself to sleep, believing her mind was broken, would have wanted them banned from the premises. But that woman was dead. "No," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Let them in." Malik raised an eyebrow, clearly questioning the tactical wisdom of letting my attackers into the room. "I need them to think they are still winning," I explained, sliding the laptop and the toxicology report under the heavy hospital blankets. "Jamal thinks he broke me in that courtroom. He thinks I am completely isolated and at his mercy. If you turn him away, he will know something is wrong. He will go home, destroy the remaining evidence, and move the rest of my money." Let him walk in here and play his hand. Malik studied my face for a long moment before nodding. He tapped the communication panel and ordered the guards to escort Jamal and Brenda to my room. He then turned to me, his expression deadly serious. I will be standing right outside that door. If he tries to touch you, if he so much as raises his voice, I am coming in. The heavy reinforced door clicked shut behind Malik, leaving me alone in the sterile silence. I quickly adjusted my posture, sinking lower into the mattress. I let my eyelids droop, relaxing my facial muscles to replicate the slack, exhausted expression I had worn for the past 8 months. I made my breathing shallow and erratic. The trap was set. A minute later, the electronic lock beeped and the door swung open. Jamal walked in first, followed closely by Brenda. Jamal had clearly maintained his performance for the military guards in the hallway. He entered the room with his shoulders slumped, his face arranged in a mask of deep, agonizing sorrow. He approached my bed, slowly reaching out as if to gently stroke my hair. But the moment the heavy door clicked shut and locked behind them, ensuring no nurses or doctors could hear, the performance abruptly ended. Jamal dropped his hand, his posture instantly straightened, and the sorrowful expression evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. Brenda stepped up beside him, crossing her arms over her expensive navy suit, looking down at me with absolute revulsion. "You really put on quite a show today," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension, passing out in the middle of a hearing. "You embarrassed me in front of Judge Reynolds. You embarrassed the entire family." I kept my eyes half closed, letting my head loll slightly to the side. "I am sick, Jamal," I whispered, deliberately slurring my words to sound heavily medicated. My legs stopped working. Brenda scoffed loudly, stepping closer to the bed. "Stop the act, Tasha. There are no cameras in here. You are not sick. You are just a broken, bitter woman who cannot handle the fact that my son is moving on with his life. You have been a burden on this family for nearly a year." Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He tossed them carelessly onto my lap. The heavy paper landed exactly where I had hidden the laptop just moments before. I looked down at the documents. The bold letters at the top clearly labeled them as a final divorce settlement and asset relinquishment agreement. "These are the final papers," Jamal said, his tone shifting into a sharp, businesslike threat. "The doctors at your previous hospital made it very clear that your brain function is rapidly deteriorating. You are unfit to manage your own care, let alone a 7-figure financial portfolio. Sign the papers, Tasha." I let my hands tremble as I touched the edge of the settlement agreement. "What happens if I do not sign them?" I asked, my voice weak and fragile. Jamal leaned over the bed, placing both of his hands flat on the mattress, trapping me in his shadow. "If you fight me on this, I will use my medical proxy to have you committed to a long-term psychiatric ward. I will drain every single account fighting you in court, and I will still take the house. Sign the papers today, and I will make sure you are transferred to a comfortable assisted living facility. Do not make this harder than it has to be." Brenda hovered right behind him, her voice a venomous hiss. "Just let my son go. You have ruined enough of his life. Sign the papers and disappear." I looked at the pen Jamal was holding out to me. I looked at his arrogant, perfectly groomed face. He was so confident, so absolutely certain of his victory, that he had no idea he was standing in a room controlled by the United States military, threatening a woman who already possessed his toxicology reports and his fraudulent bank transfers. I let a single tear roll down my cheek, playing the defeated, terrified wife. "Jamal, please," I whimpered softly. "My hands are shaking too much. I cannot read these right now. My head hurts. Just give me 2 days, please. Just 2 days to read over everything, and I will sign whatever you want." Jamal let out a loud, frustrated sigh, rolling his eyes exactly as he had done in the courtroom. He looked at Brenda, who gave a brief, dismissive nod. "Fine," Jamal snapped, tossing the pen onto the bed beside the papers. "You have exactly 48 hours. I will be back on Thursday morning with Chloe to finalize the notary signatures. If you try to pull another stunt, I will have the transport team waiting in the lobby to take you to the psych ward." He turned on his heel and walked toward the door, not looking back once. Brenda lingered for a second longer, offering me one final glare of pure disgust before following her son out of the room. The heavy security door clicked shut and locked behind them. I waited 10 seconds to ensure they were gone. Then I sat up perfectly straight. I wiped the single tear off my cheek, picked up Jamal's expensive pen, and tossed it into the trash can across the room. The 48-hour countdown had begun, and I was going to use every single second of it to build a trap they would never escape. I reached beneath the heavy hospital blankets and pulled the matte black tactical laptop back onto my lap. The screen illuminated the dim room, casting a harsh glow across the pristine white sheets. My mind locked onto the specific threat Jamal had just delivered. He said he was coming back on Thursday morning with Chloe to finalize the signatures. Chloe. Just hearing her name in my head made my blood boil hot enough to burn away any lingering weakness in my limbs. Chloe was a petite, soft-spoken white woman who had married Jamal's older brother Trey 3 years ago. From the moment she entered the family, she had played the role of the sweet, innocent, overly accommodating sister-in-law. When my mysterious illness first took hold and I was confined to my bed, Chloe had practically sprinted into our home. She offered to manage all the household logistics, the medical bills, and the daily finances. She told me to rest my beautiful head and let her carry the burden. I was so desperate for help, so weakened by the poison destroying my nervous system, that I handed her the keys to my kingdom. My hands flew across the keyboard as I recalled the specific afternoon 3 months ago, when my data analyst instincts had managed to break through the toxic fog. I had been sitting at the kitchen island clutching a mug of tea when I noticed a glaring discrepancy on a bank statement left on the counter. $50,000 had been transferred out of my liquid savings account. When Chloe walked into the kitchen, I asked her about it. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her of theft. I simply asked for the transaction receipts. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifyingly effective. Chloe did not defend the math. She did not provide an explanation. Her lower lip immediately quivered, her pale blue eyes filled with heavy pooling tears that spilled over her cheeks on command. She gasped for air, bringing her hands to her chest, and crumbled against the kitchen counter. She began to sob violently, her voice pitching into a high, fragile wail. She cried about how exhausted she was. She cried about how she was sacrificing her own marriage, spending hours away from Trey, just to help me survive. She cried about how she was trying her absolute best to hold our family together, only to be interrogated like a criminal. The sound of her weaponized weeping acted like a siren. Jamal and Brenda came rushing into the kitchen. They did not ask what happened. They saw a crying white woman and a sick black woman, and the narrative wrote itself. Brenda immediately stepped between us, shielding Chloe as if I were holding a weapon instead of a ceramic mug. "Look what you did," Brenda had screamed at me, her face contorted with rage. "This poor girl is bending over backward to keep a roof over your head, and you treat her like trash." Jamal had wrapped his arm around Chloe, rubbing her shoulder comfortingly before turning his cold, dead eyes on me. "You are aggressive, Tasha," he had said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "Your illness is making you paranoid and mean. You need to stop attacking the people who are trying to save you." They backed me into a corner. They stood over me, demanding that I apologize for my hostility. And the sick, twisted tragedy of it all was that the poison in my veins made me doubt my own sanity. I felt dizzy and confused. I looked at Chloe, burying her face in my husband's shoulder, and I actually believed I was losing my mind. I apologized. I sat in my own kitchen, shaking and humiliated, and apologized to the woman who was actively robbing me blind. I stared at the laptop screen, the memory fueling a dark, consuming fire in my chest. Chloe had used her tears as a shield and a sword. She used the classic, deeply ingrained societal dynamic of the fragile victim to completely invalidate my voice. She knew exactly what she was doing, and Jamal and Brenda weaponized that dynamic to keep me subdued. They thought my apology was surrender. They thought I was permanently broken. I typed a new sequence of commands into the terminal. If Chloe wanted to play the victim, I was going to give her a front-row seat to a real massacre. I did not just want to stop the divorce or secure my assets. I wanted to tear down the entire fake reality they had constructed. I initiated a deep dive into Chloe's digital footprint. She was the weak link. Jamal was an investment banker who knew how to cover his tracks, but Chloe was vain and careless. I bypassed her personal email security with a simple brute force algorithm. I accessed her social media direct messages and her cloud storage. The data began pouring in, and it was worse than I had ever imagined. I found a group chat between Jamal, Brenda, and Chloe. The chat was named The Waiting Game. My stomach turned as I read months of their daily conversations. While I was upstairs fighting for my life, shivering and vomiting, they were in this chat mocking my pain. Chloe had sent a message complaining about how I looked. "She is getting so gaunt," Chloe wrote. "It is depressing to look at her. Tell her to put on some blush." Jamal had replied with a laughing emoji. "Just keep her signing the transfer forms. A few more months and the studio is fully funded." Brenda had chimed in, constantly complaining about the smell of the sick room and urging Jamal to increase the dosage. "Give her a double scoop today," Brenda had texted on a Tuesday when my legs had completely given out. "I am tired of playing nurse." They were not just plotting my death. They were entertained by it. They were annoyed that my execution was taking so long. I downloaded every single message, every timestamp, every digital receipt, and backed them up to 3 separate encrypted servers. I exported the bank transfers showing exactly how Chloe had funneled my tech stock earnings into her luxury Pilates studio. I gathered the evidence of Jamal forging my signature on the secondary wire transfers while I was heavily sedated. I closed the laptop and pressed the call button for Major Sterling. Malik stepped into the room seconds later, locking the heavy door behind him. He took one look at my face and knew the battlefield had shifted. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice low and ready. "I need a wire," I said, my voice steady, stripped of all the fake weakness I had displayed for Jamal. "I need hidden cameras, high-definition audio, and a police detective you trust with your life. Jamal and Chloe are coming back on Thursday morning to finalize the theft of my estate. I am going to let them confess to everything on tape, and then I am going to burn their lives to the ground." Malik did not hesitate. He gave a single firm nod. "Consider it done." I laid back against the pillows, staring up at the sterile ceiling. Thursday was 48 hours away. 2 days until my husband brought his mother and his sister-in-law into a trap they could not cry their way out of. I closed my eyes and let the steady beeping of the heart monitor serve as a countdown. Wednesday morning broke through the reinforced glass of my hospital window. The 48-hour countdown Jamal had given me was officially ticking away. I had spent the entire night wide awake staring at the glowing screen of the tactical laptop Malik had provided. The initial discovery of Chloe using my money to fund her luxury Pilates studio was just a surface scratch. I am a senior data analyst who builds predictive financial models for massive healthcare conglomerates. Tracking complex numbers is my territory, and my husband had vastly underestimated the digital predator he had married. I logged deeper into my secure encrypted cloud server. Jamal knew nothing about this hidden infrastructure. I ran a series of aggressive financial algorithms, cross-referencing every bank statement, tax return, and investment portfolio attached to my social security number. I matched the transaction dates against my personal medical journal. The shock hit me all over again, cold and sharp. Jamal did not just want me out of the way so he could move on with his life. He was actively bleeding me dry, systematically dismantling the financial empire I had built long before I ever let him put a ring on my finger. I watched the data compile and form a horrifying picture. Hundreds of thousands of dollars from my tech stock earnings had been siphoned off over the past year. Every single time my physical symptoms had spiked, every time I had been confined to my bed, violently ill, and losing sensation in my legs, Jamal had been downstairs authorizing massive wire transfers. He had used the temporary medical proxy he manipulated me into signing to take out exorbitant margin loans against my highest-performing portfolios. He was pulling out raw cash and routing it through a labyrinth of shell companies to avoid detection during our inevitable divorce. I cracked his final encryption layer in under 10 minutes. The money did not just go to Chloe. Jamal had funneled over $250,000 into a hidden offshore trust. I pulled the formation documents. The sole beneficiary of the trust was Brenda. My mother-in-law was sitting on a fortune built entirely from my sweat and intellect stolen, while she stood over my hospital bed calling me a useless burden. I needed this locked down perfectly. I picked up my phone and called my divorce attorney, Valerie. She was a ruthless, brilliant black woman who dominated family law in Atlanta and never lost a case. When I told her where I was and briefly explained what I had found, she canceled her morning court hearings and drove straight to the military base. Malik personally escorted her through the armed security checkpoints and brought her to my room. When Valerie walked through the heavy reinforced door, she took one look at my pale, recovering face and the thick stacks of printed data Malik had helped me compile. I pushed the military toxicology report across the hospital tray table. I followed it with the financial algorithms, the wire transfer receipts, and the printed transcripts from the group chat I had hacked the night before. I watched Valerie carefully read the evidence of the thallium poisoning. I watched her trace the money laundering. I saw her eyes turn absolutely lethal as she read the arrogant, mocking text messages between my husband, his mother, and his sister-in-law. We spent the next 4 hours building an ironclad cage. Valerie drafted emergency freezing orders for every single account Jamal and Chloe had touched. The injunctions were prepped and ready to be filed with the federal court the absolute second the trap was sprung. I went back into my code and set up digital tripwires across my banking portals. If Jamal tried to move so much as a single dollar from the remaining accounts before Thursday morning, it would trigger an immediate lockdown and instantly alert federal banking regulators. He was trapped in a financial web of my making, completely oblivious to his impending destruction. By Wednesday afternoon, Malik returned to my room accompanied by a man he introduced as Detective Carter. Carter was a trusted, seasoned investigator who specialized in financial crimes and attempted homicides. He did not offer empty pity or ask if I was sure I wanted to proceed against my own family. He simply opened a heavy black duffel bag and went straight to work. Under the guise of routine hospital maintenance, Detective Carter wired my entire room. He embedded a microscopic high-definition camera directly into the digital wall clock facing the foot of my bed. He slipped a military-grade audio transmitter behind the wooden headboard and seamlessly integrated a backup microphone into the base of my bedside lamp. Every angle was covered. Every whisper would be captured in crystal-clear audio. As evening fell, the room was perfectly primed. The maintenance facade was cleared away, leaving the space looking like a standard sterile recovery ward. Valerie packed her briefcase, giving my hand a firm, reassuring squeeze before heading back to her office to prepare the legal strike. Detective Carter tested the audio and video feeds on a secure monitor, confirming the signal was flawless before stepping out into the hallway to coordinate with the base security team. Malik stood at the foot of my bed, his arms crossed over his broad chest, his dark eyes fierce with protective resolve. The cameras were hot. The financial assets were digitally barricaded. The toxicology reports were signed and certified. All I had to do now was rest, wait for the sun to rise, and let the monsters walk willingly into their own slaughter. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy, oppressive downpour, the rain lashing violently against the reinforced glass of my hospital room. I lay perfectly still in the sterile bed, taking slow, measured breaths to calm the adrenaline surging through my veins. The digital clock mounted on the wall, the one currently housing Detective Carter's high-definition hidden camera, shifted to exactly 9 in the morning. Right on schedule, the heavy electronic lock on the secure door beeped. Jamal walked in first. He was wearing a pristine navy suit, exuding the smug, untouchable confidence of a man who believed he had finally won the ultimate prize. Brenda followed closely behind him, clutching her expensive pearl necklace, her chin raised in a posture of absolute triumph. Bringing up the rear was Chloe. She strutted into the room carrying a brand-new Bottega Veneta handbag, an item I knew from my data extraction cost exactly $4,000 of my stolen tech stock earnings. Chloe immediately let out a loud, theatrical sigh, waving a manicured hand in front of her face. "This hospital lighting is absolutely draining," she complained, her voice dripping with boredom. "Jamal, can we make this quick? I have a contractor meeting at the studio in an hour to approve the imported marble." I forced my hands to tremble. I let my shoulders slump forward, sinking deeper into the pillows, as if the mere sight of them drained my remaining life force. I stared down at the divorce settlement and asset relinquishment papers resting on my lap, a pen loosely gripped in my shaking fingers. I looked up at Jamal with wide, tear-filled eyes, projecting the ultimate image of a broken, defeated woman. "Jamal, please," I whispered, making sure my voice cracked perfectly, so the hidden microphones captured every nuance of my fake desperation. I read the papers. "You are taking the townhouse. You are taking my entire investment portfolio. You are leaving me with nothing but medical debt. How am I supposed to survive?" Jamal stepped up to the edge of the bed, planting both of his hands firmly on the mattress, trapping me in his shadow. He smiled, a cold, predatory stretching of his lips that made my stomach churn. "I am leaving you with your life, Tasha. That is more than generous, considering the massive burden you have become to this family. Sign the papers right now, and I will have the transport team move you to the psychiatric facility this afternoon. Do not make a scene." I kept the pen hovering over the signature line, letting my hand shake violently. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for any shred of the man I thought I had married. "Did you ever love me?" I asked, letting a single pathetic tear roll down my cheek. "Or was it just for the money? Was I just a paycheck to you from the very beginning?" Jamal threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, cruel sound that echoed off the sterile hospital walls. "Love," he scoffed, shaking his head. "You were an investment, Tasha, a highly profitable one, until you started getting too arrogant, too fiercely independent. You thought making more money than me made you the head of the household. I just had to remind you of your actual place. And honestly, slipping that tasteless thallium powder into your protein shakes every morning was the easiest thing I have ever done. You drank it down without a single question." Brenda stepped up beside her son, her face twisted in a nasty, vindictive sneer. "You deserved every ounce of that sickness," she spat, pointing a finger at my face. "You strutted around that $1 million house, disrespecting my son, acting like your little tech career made you better than us." Jamal needed a wife who knew how to serve her husband and respect her elders. I told him months ago to double the dosage so we could be done with this miserable charade. "You are lucky we are letting you walk away into a padded cell instead of a coffin." Chloe stepped out from behind Brenda, casually adjusting the strap of her stolen designer bag. She looked down at me with pure, unadulterated contempt, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "You really are pathetic, Tasha," she said, letting out a sharp giggle. "All those years acting so superior, and you did not even notice me draining your accounts right under your nose. Thanks for funding my Pilates studio, by the way. Your money looks so much better on me." The trap had snapped completely shut. The audio recording was crystal clear. The video feed was flawless. In their overwhelming hubris, they had just confessed to attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, and grand larceny completely unprompted, while standing in a room monitored by federal and local investigators. The performance was over. I stopped trembling. The fake tears dried instantly. I lowered the pen and set it neatly on the metal tray table. I pushed the heavy hospital blankets aside and sat up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back and lifting my chin. The fragile, slurring victim vanished into thin air, replaced entirely by the senior data analyst who had just engineered their total destruction. I looked dead into Jamal's eyes. The smug arrogance on his face began to waver, replaced by a sudden creeping confusion as he registered the drastic shift in my posture and tone. He took a hesitant step back, his brow furrowing. I offered him a slow, chilling smile. I raised my voice, speaking clearly and deliberately to the hidden microphones embedded in the walls. "Did you guys get all of that?" The color instantly drained from Jamal's face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. Brenda gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. Chloe dropped her stolen handbag, the expensive leather hitting the linoleum floor with a dull thud. Before any of them could utter a single word, the heavy door connecting my room to the adjoining private bathroom swung wide open. Detective Carter stepped out of the tiled bathroom, first his gold badge catching the harsh fluorescent light. Major Sterling flanked him, a silent, imposing wall of military authority. His dark eyes locked onto Jamal with a lethal intensity. Jamal stumbled backward, crashing into the hospital tray table, the heavy legal documents scattered across the linoleum floor. The arrogant investment banker who had just bragged about slipping poison into my daily meals suddenly looked like a terrified child. "You set me up!" Jamal stammered, his voice cracking as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is illegal. You cannot record me without my consent." Detective Carter did not even blink. Actually, under state law, only one party needs to consent to the recording. Tasha consented. You just confessed to attempted murder, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy on high-definition audio and video. I have federal agents currently executing search warrants at your office and at Chloe's brand new Pilates studio. Chloe let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to pick up her expensive handbag, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp the leather straps. She looked at Jamal with wide, panicked eyes. "You told me this was foolproof!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the small room. "You said she was too brain-damaged to figure it out." "Shut up!" Brenda snapped at her, though Brenda herself was trembling, her pristine navy suit suddenly looking ill-fitting as her posture collapsed. She turned to Detective Carter, attempting to summon her usual domineering authority. "My son was joking. We were just humoring a sick woman. You have no proof of anything." Major Sterling stepped forward, holding up the thick sealed folder containing the military toxicology report. "We have your son's daily poison recipe isolated in her bloodstream," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "We have the financial routing numbers matching the exact dates of her physical decline. The joke is over." Detective Carter reached to his belt, unholstering a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He moved toward Jamal, but I held up my hand. "Wait," I said, my voice cutting through the panic in the room. Carter paused, looking at me with a questioning frown. Malik crossed his arms but stayed silent, trusting my lead. I looked at my husband, my mother-in-law, and the sister-in-law who had bled me dry. They were backed against the hospital room door, sweating, terrified and utterly defeated. But arresting them in a quiet, sterile room felt entirely too private. They had humiliated me in public. They had dragged my name through the mud in front of our family, my friends, and the legal system. They had stood in a court of law and called me crazy. "I do not want them arrested here," I told the detective. "I want it done on the record. I want Judge Reynolds to hear every single word of that tape." Carter frowned slightly. "If we let them walk out of this room, they are a flight risk." "They cannot run anywhere," my divorce attorney Valerie said, as she pushed her way into the room through the main hallway door. She adjusted her designer glasses and flashed Jamal a predatory smile. "I just received confirmation from the federal magistrate. Every single bank account tied to Jamal, Brenda, and Chloe is frozen. Passports are flagged. You cannot buy a plane ticket, you cannot access a single dollar of my client's money, and you cannot leave the state of Georgia." I looked back at Jamal. His chest was heaving as he realized the sheer magnitude of the trap he had walked into. "I will see you in court next week," I told him, my voice steady and cold. "Be sure to wear your best suit." 2 weeks later, I walked through the heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse. I did not need a wheelchair. I did not need assistance. My body had completely purged the heavy metals, and my mind was razor sharp. I wore a tailored crimson-red power suit that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor with absolute authority. Jamal was already sitting at the plaintiff table. He looked entirely different from the man who had confidently smirked at me during our last hearing. His suit hung loosely on his frame. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Brenda sat in the gallery behind him, staring straight ahead, her face pale and drawn. Chloe sat 2 rows back, chewing aggressively on her fingernails. Judge Reynolds called the court to order, banging his gavel. He looked down at his docket, then looked at me, his eyes widening slightly as he took in my healthy, commanding appearance. "Counsel," Judge Reynolds said, addressing Jamal's lawyer. "At our last hearing, you requested an emergency injunction to seize Mrs. Sterling's assets due to severe cognitive decline. I must say the respondent looks remarkably well today." Jamal's lawyer swallowed hard, looking at his client with obvious discomfort. Jamal had clearly not told his attorney about the hospital ambush. Valerie stood up, smoothing the front of her blazer. Your Honor, my client is in excellent health because she is no longer being actively poisoned by the plaintiff. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic murmur. Judge Reynolds slammed his gavel, demanding order. "Excuse me, counselor," he barked. "That is a massive accusation to bring into a civil asset hearing." "We have brought the receipts, Your Honor," Valerie replied smoothly. She called Major Malik Sterling to the stand. Malik marched up to the witness box in his full military dress uniform, radiating absolute credibility. He swore an oath, and then presented the certified military toxicology reports to the court. He explained the thallium poisoning, detailing how the heavy metal was designed to mimic a degenerative neurological disease, matching my exact symptoms perfectly. Jamal buried his face in his hands. Brenda closed her eyes. Valerie then requested permission to submit audiovisual evidence. Judge Reynolds, visibly disturbed by the toxicology report, granted it immediately. The court IT technician linked a secure drive to the large monitors mounted on the courtroom walls. The hidden camera footage from my hospital room began to play. The audio was flawless. The entire courtroom watched as Jamal leaned over my hospital bed, bragging about slipping tasteless powder into my daily protein shakes. They heard Brenda calling me a useless burden. They heard Chloe laughing about using my hard-earned tech money to buy imported marble for her Pilates studio. The sound of Jamal's cruel, arrogant laughter echoed off the mahogany walls, sealing his fate in front of the judge he had tried to manipulate. When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Reynolds was absolutely livid. His face was flushed with pure, unadulterated rage. He had been used as a pawn in an attempted murder plot, and he was not going to let it slide. He gripped his gavel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I am striking down every single motion filed by the plaintiff with extreme prejudice," Judge Reynolds roared, his voice shaking the walls. "Mr. Sterling, you are a disgrace." He gestured sharply to the armed bailiffs standing at the perimeter of the room. "Take them into custody immediately." 4 Fulton County deputies moved in instantly. They grabbed Jamal by his arms, yanking him out of his chair and slamming steel handcuffs onto his wrists. He did not fight back. He just stared at the floor, completely broken. Deputies moved into the gallery, pulling Brenda out of her seat and cuffing her hands behind her back. Chloe panicked. She threw her hands in the air, instantly resorting to her classic defense mechanism. The heavy theatrical tears began to pour down her face. She sobbed violently, her voice pitching into a high, fragile wail. "I did not know," she cried, looking up at the judge. "I am a victim here. They manipulated me. I was just trying to help my family." Judge Reynolds leaned over the bench, looking down at Chloe with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Save your tears for the federal prosecutor, ma'am. You are going to need them." The bailiffs dragged them out of the courtroom in chains. I stood at my table, watching the doors swing shut behind them, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The nightmare was officially over. The fallout was swift and brutal. Karmic justice did not miss a single target. Jamal was convicted of attempted murder and wire fraud, receiving a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Brenda received a 10-year sentence for conspiracy. Her pristine reputation in the Atlanta social scene was completely annihilated, her name becoming a cautionary tale of greed and malice. Chloe's tears could not save her from the paper trail. The federal government seized the commercial lease for her Pilates studio, liquidating all the assets to pay back my stolen funds. My brother-in-law Trey filed for divorce the moment the indictments were unsealed. Chloe went to prison for money laundering and conspiracy, her precious designer bags traded for a standard-issue jumpsuit. With Valerie's relentless legal strategy, I was awarded 100% of our marital assets. I retained sole ownership of the Atlanta townhouse, recovered my entire tech stock portfolio, and won massive punitive damages against Jamal's remaining liquid capital. I did not just survive their plot, I claimed their futures. 6 months later, I walked out of a high-end steakhouse in Buckhead, the cool evening air feeling crisp and clean. I was glowing, completely detoxed and thriving in my career. Walking right beside me, his hand resting comfortably on the small of my back, was Major Malik Sterling. We had traded hospital rooms and tactical laptops for quiet dinners and genuine laughter. It was the beginning of a healthy, fiercely protected romance built on absolute trust. The heavy stack of legal documents hit my lap with a dull thud. The thick premium paper felt like an anchor pinning my legs to the sterile hospital mattress. The bold black lettering across the top page was impossible to miss. Final divorce settlement, an asset relinquishment agreement. I stared at the words, feeling the sheer gravity of what my husband was attempting to do. Jamal stood right beside the bed, his imposing frame blocking out the overhead fluorescent lights, casting a long, dark shadow over my body. Brenda stood just behind his shoulder, her arms crossed tightly over her expensive navy suit, looking down at me with an expression of absolute revulsion. The suffocating, heavy scent of her floral perfume mixed with the sharp, clinical bleach of the hospital room, making my stomach churn. Every instinct in my body, every ounce of pride I had built over 35 years as a fiercely independent black woman, screamed at me to fight back. The burning, white-hot rage clawed at my throat. I wanted to throw the papers right back into his perfectly groomed face. I wanted to scream that I knew exactly what he was doing, that I knew about the poisoned protein shakes, the missing funds, the massive coordinated betrayal. I wanted to grab him by the lapels of his custom suit and tell him he was going to burn in a federal prison. But I did not scream, I did not lash out. My time as a military contractor had taught me how to survive hostile environments. And the first rule of survival is knowing when to play dead. If I reacted with anger, Jamal would win. He had already threatened to use his medical proxy to have me committed to a psychiatric ward. If I started screaming about poison and stolen money without having all my evidence locked down and ready to deploy, I would look exactly like the paranoid, hysterical woman they had convinced the world I was. The hospital staff would sedate me, Jamal would sign the transfer papers, and I would disappear into a padded room while he liquidated my entire life. So I became the Ice Queen. I locked the rage away in a dark, cold box at the back of my mind. I forced my facial muscles to slacken, draining away any trace of the sharp, calculating senior data analyst. I let my shoulders slump forward, sinking deeper into the flimsy hospital pillows. I commanded my hands to tremble, a violent, pathetic shaking that made the thick legal papers rustle against my sheets. I looked up at Jamal, widening my eyes and letting them fill with heavy, unshed tears. I projected the exact image he came here to see, a broken, exhausted, defeated woman whose mind was failing her. "Sign the papers," Tasha Jamal demanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. He pulled a silver pen from the inner pocket of his jacket and held it out to me. His tone was sharp, businesslike, completely stripped of the fake sympathy he used when the nurses were around. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. You are in no condition to manage a 7-figure financial portfolio. The doctors have made it very clear that your cognitive function is deteriorating rapidly." I reached out with a trembling hand, intentionally missing the pen by an inch before clumsily swatting at it. I let it roll onto the mattress. I looked at the papers, then back at him, blinking slowly as if my brain could not process the visual information. "Jamal, please," I whimpered softly. I forced my voice to crack. I deliberately slurred the syllables, mimicking the heavy toxic fog that had plagued me for the past 8 months. "My hands are shaking too much. I cannot read these words. They are swimming on the page." Brenda scoffed loudly, a sound of pure disgust that echoed off the bare walls. "Stop the act, Tasha," she snapped, stepping closer to the bed. "There are no cameras in here. You are not fooling anyone. You are just a bitter, broken woman who cannot handle the fact that my son is moving on to a better life. You have been a useless burden on this family for nearly a year. Just let him go. Sign the papers and disappear." I ignored her, keeping my wide, tearful eyes locked entirely on my husband. I needed to feed his massive ego. I needed him to feel so powerful, so absolutely victorious, that he would grant me the tiny window of time I required to spring my trap. "Did you ever love me?" I asked, my voice barely above a broken whisper. "Or am I just a problem you need to throw away?" Jamal leaned over the bed, planting both of his hands firmly on the mattress, trapping me entirely in his space. He smiled, a cold, predatory stretching of his lips. "You are a liability, Tasha. If you fight me on this, I will use my medical proxy today. I will have the transport team down here in an hour to take you to a locked psychiatric facility. I will drain every single account we have fighting you in court, and I will still take the house. Sign the papers now, and I will make sure you are transferred to a comfortable assisted living facility. I let a single tear spill over my eyelashes, tracking a hot path down my cheek. I looked down at the signature line, acting as though the weight of my defeat was physically crushing me. Just give me 2 days, I begged, letting my voice dissolve into a pathetic sob. Please, Jamal. My head hurts so badly. I cannot focus on the legal jargon. Just 48 hours. Give me 2 days to read over everything, and I promise I will sign whatever you want. I just need to rest my eyes. Please. Jamal hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he assessed my trembling frame. Make her sign it now, Jamal. Brenda hissed from behind him, her greed making her impatient. Do not give her another second to drag this out. But Jamal held up a hand, silencing his mother. His sheer arrogance blinded him. He looked down at me, seeing nothing but a helpless, brain-damaged victim who had entirely surrendered to his authority. He wanted to play the magnanimous victor. He wanted to feel like a god granting a dying woman one final pathetic request. Besides forcing my hand in a secure military hospital wing, could draw unwanted attention from the guards stationed outside. He thought he had all the time in the world. Fine, Jamal snapped, standing up straight and adjusting his immaculate suit jacket. You have exactly 48 hours. I will be back on Thursday morning with Chloe to finalize the notary signatures. If you try to pull another stunt, or if these papers are not signed when I walk through that door, the psychiatric transport team will be waiting in the lobby. He turned on his heel and walked toward the door, not looking back once. Brenda lingered for a second longer. She offered me one final glare of pure, unadulterated contempt before turning and following her son out of the room. The heavy reinforced door clicked shut behind them. I heard the electronic lock engage, sealing the room. I waited 10 full seconds, listening to the sound of their footsteps fading down the sterile hallway. Then the performance ended. The violent trembling in my hands stopped instantly. The tears dried on my face. I pushed the heavy hospital blankets aside and sat up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back to release the tension. I reached down, picked up the silver pen Jamal had left on the mattress, and tossed it straight into the garbage can across the room. I did not feel weak anymore. I felt dangerous. The broken, exhausted victim they thought they had conquered was dead. They had given me 48 hours completely unaware that I was going to use every single second of it to build a financial and legal trap so tight they would never see the sunlight again. The countdown had officially begun. The heavy reinforced door hissed open less than 5 minutes after my husband and his mother vacated the hallway. Major Malik Sterling stepped inside, locking the deadbolt behind him. He did not ask if I was okay. He took one look at my rigid posture, the discarded silver pen in the trash can, and the sheer fury radiating from my eyes, and he knew the operation had shifted from defense to offense. He walked to the foot of my bed and slapped a thick red stamped manila folder onto the mattress. The official toxicology report from the military lab had arrived. I opened the folder. The medical jargon was dense, but the highlighted conclusion at the bottom of the first page was impossible to misinterpret. Thallium. The word sat there, ugly and lethal. Malik pulled up a metal chair and sat down, his voice a low, steady rumble. Thallium is a heavy metal, he explained, pointing to the chemical breakdown on the second page. It is highly toxic, completely tasteless, and entirely odorless. It is notoriously difficult to detect in standard civilian blood panels unless a doctor knows exactly what they are looking for. Because it accumulates in the nervous system, it mimics the symptoms of degenerative neurological diseases. Numbness in the extremities, crippling brain fog, severe gastrointestinal distress, and eventual cardiac failure. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening precision. My mind flashed back to our sunlit kitchen in Atlanta. Jamal standing at the marble island wearing his tailored suit, smiling warmly as he handed me a frosted glass. You need to keep your strength up, baby, he used to say, kissing my forehead. Drink your protein shake. I made it exactly how you like it. He had insisted on making those shakes every single morning for the past 8 months. He stood there and watched me swallow every last drop of his custom heavy metal cocktail. My own husband had turned my breakfast into a slow-motion execution. I closed the medical file and looked up at Malik. The shaking in my hands was completely gone. I need my tactical laptop, I told him, and I need a secure, untraceable military connection. Malik nodded once, retrieving the matte black machine from a secured locker in the corner of the room. He handed it to me and stepped back, standing guard by the door. I booted up the system. The victim mentality was dead and buried. I am a senior data analyst. I build predictive financial models and crack complex data structures for a living. Jamal thought he was a genius because he wore expensive suits and threw around investment banking jargon. He was about to learn what a real digital predator looked like. I bypassed his standard passwords instantly. Jamal was arrogant, using the same base numeric sequences for his personal accounts that he used for our home security system. But I did not just want his checking accounts. I wanted the deep hidden architecture of his betrayal. I deployed a brute force algorithm to crack his encrypted cloud backups. The firewall fell in less than 12 minutes. The data poured onto my screen in a chaotic flood of numbers, but I quickly organized it into a clear, undeniable map of their crimes. I traced the massive wire transfers Jamal had authorized while I was incapacitated. Hundreds of thousands of dollars from my tech stock earnings had been quietly siphoned off, routed through a labyrinth of shell companies to avoid detection during our inevitable divorce. I followed the money trail directly to Chloe, my sweet, fragile white sister-in-law, who wept tears of exhaustion whenever she had to sort my medical mail. The shell companies were all feeding into a single commercial business account registered in Buckhead. Chloe was listed as the sole proprietor of a high-end luxury Pilates studio. Jamal and Chloe had partnered up to funnel my hard-earned money into funding her vanity business. My husband and his brother's wife were getting rich off my slow, agonizing decline. As I stared at the digital transfer logs, a profound, sickening realization washed over me. I had spent a decade climbing the corporate ladder as a Black woman, in tech, facing down every bias and systemic hurdle in the industry to build my own wealth. I had sacrificed my sleep, my social life, and my 20s to accumulate a portfolio that guaranteed my financial independence. Jamal knew exactly how hard I had fought for every single dollar. Yet he felt entirely entitled to take it all and hand it over to a woman who had never worked a hard day in her life. Chloe had spent the last 3 years weaponizing her fragility, bursting into convenient tears whenever someone asked her to take responsibility for her actions. She played the delicate, overwhelmed white woman to absolute perfection, manipulating my husband and my mother-in-law into treating her like royalty while they treated me like a workhorse. And now they were literally liquidating my life force to build her a high-end wellness empire. The sheer audacity was staggering. They were sitting in my custom-built Atlanta townhouse, drinking wine bought with my money, casually discussing the optimal dosage of heavy metals needed to stop my heart. But the financial theft was not enough to satisfy my need for absolute destruction. I wanted their words. I wanted their intent documented in black and white. I pivoted my attack, targeting their synchronized messaging apps. Chloe was vain and sloppy with her digital footprint. She left her iCloud backups completely unprotected. I synced her message history to my terminal and ran a keyword search. What I found made the blood in my veins run cold. It was a private group chat created 7 months ago. The members were Jamal, Brenda, and Chloe. The name of the chat was The Waiting Game. I opened the thread, scrolling back through months of daily conversations. While I was upstairs fighting for my life, shivering under blankets, and losing the ability to walk, the 3 of them were downstairs mocking my pain. I read a message from Chloe dated 3 months prior. She sent a photo of imported Italian marble samples. "Do you guys think the Carrara white or the Calicotta gold looks better for the studio reception desk?" she asked. Jamal replied 5 minutes later. "Go with the gold. We can afford it." The crazy lady had another dizzy spell today, so I got her to sign the secondary wire transfer authorization. "Just keep the receipts quiet until she is out of the picture." Brenda chimed in immediately after. "Make sure you get the house deed sorted before her brain totally melts, Jamal." I am tired of smelling the sick room. Give her a double dose tomorrow. I want her gone before the holidays. I read another message from Brenda that made my vision swim with rage. Jamal, she wrote a few weeks later, make sure you clear out her home office before the paramedics come. I want to turn that room into a nursery for when Trey and Chloe finally have a baby. They deserve a nice space. My own mother-in-law was planning to erase my existence and hand my sanctuary over to the very woman who was helping murder me. They did not just want me dead. They wanted me replaced, overwritten, and forgotten. I kept scrolling my eyes, scanning line after line of pure, unadulterated evil. They laughed about my hair thinning. They joked about my inability to hold a pen. Jamal sent a photo of the protein shake blender with a skull and crossbones emoji, complaining that thallium was getting harder to source without raising red flags. Chloe responded with a laughing emoji, telling him to hurry up because she needed the final 100,000 to secure the studio equipment. They were not just plotting my death. They were thoroughly entertained by it. They viewed my execution as an annoying administrative hurdle standing between them and luxury real estate. I highlighted the entire group chat, every timestamp, every digital receipt, every laughing emoji, and exported the massive file to a secure external drive. I paired it with the financial routing numbers and the official military toxicology report. I had the motive, the method, and the weapon all perfectly documented. They had handed me the exact tools I needed to build their prison cells. I closed the laptop screen, the soft click echoing in the quiet hospital room. I looked over at Malik. His posture was rigid, his expression tight with suppressed rage, as he processed the sheer cruelty of what I had just uncovered. He did not offer empty sympathy. He knew exactly what kind of war we were fighting now. They are coming back on Thursday morning, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Jamal thinks I'm going to sign my life away. He thinks he has won. Malik uncrossed his arms and stepped toward the bed. What is your next move? I looked at the digital clock on the wall. I'm going to let them confess. I'm going to let them walk into this room, stand over my bed, and brag about every single thing they did to me. And I'm going to capture every second of it. I need this room wired. Malik did not flinch at my request. He pulled a secured encrypted phone from his tactical vest and dialed a number from memory. He spoke in clipped absolute terms, telling the person on the other end to drop whatever case they were working on and get to the military base immediately. He hung up and looked at me with a grim nod. Detective Elias Carter was on his way. Carter was a veteran investigator who specialized in complex financial crimes and attempted homicides. Malik trusted him with his life, and right now that was the only credential that mattered to me. But before the detective even stepped foot inside the hospital, I needed my legal flank entirely bulletproof. I reached for my phone and called Valerie. Valerie was the most ruthless family law attorney in Atlanta. She was a brilliant, sharply dressed black woman who dominated the courtroom and had a reputation for leaving her opposing counsel in absolute ruins. I gave her a 2-minute summary of the thallium poisoning, the hidden shell companies, and the group chat transcripts. She did not ask questions. She simply told me she was canceling her afternoon court appearances and driving straight to the base. Valerie arrived just ahead of Detective Carter. Malik personally escorted them both through the armed military checkpoints and brought them into my secure room. Valerie walked in wearing a pristine white tailored suit, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She took one look at my pale face, then zeroed in on the thick stacks of printed data Malik and I had organized on the tray table. I handed her the official military toxicology report first. I watched her eyes scan the chemical breakdown, confirming the heavy metal poisoning. Then I handed her the financial routing algorithms, detailing how my husband and my sister-in-law had funneled my tech stock earnings into a commercial lease for a Pilates studio. Finally, I handed her the printed pages of the group chat, where Jamal, Brenda, and Chloe openly laughed about dosing me and planning my funeral. Valerie did not gasp. She did not express empty sympathy. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. She tapped a manicured fingernail against the group chat transcript and looked at me with eyes full of lethal calculation. Tasha, Valerie said, her voice dropping into a smooth, dangerous register. I am going to take everything he owns. I am going to take the townhouse, the investment portfolios, the retirement accounts, and the cars. By the time I am done with him in civil court, your husband will not be able to afford a cup of coffee." Detective Carter stepped forward, setting his heavy black duffel bag onto the secondary hospital bed. He was a tall, observant man who radiated quiet authority. He shook my hand and immediately reviewed the evidence alongside Valerie. Carter confirmed that the group chat and the financial transfers provided enough probable cause for a warrant, but the thallium poisoning was the golden ticket. However, Jamal was an investment banker with expensive lawyers. Carter explained that a direct, unprompted confession captured on high-definition audio and video would completely eliminate any chance of Jamal pleading ignorance or blaming the poisoning on an accidental environmental exposure. Under Georgia law, only one party needs to consent to a recording for it to be legally admissible in court. I am that party, I told Carter firmly. I consent to every camera and every microphone you put in this room. I want them caught in 4K resolution. Carter gave a grim smile and unzipped his duffel bag. Under the guise of routine hospital maintenance, he went to work. The transformation of my sterile recovery room into a high-tech surveillance trap was a masterclass in covert operations. Carter swapped out the standard digital wall clock facing the foot of my bed with an identical model that housed a microscopic high-definition camera lens perfectly angled to capture anyone standing over me. Next, he moved to the wooden headboard behind my pillows. He carefully embedded a military-grade directional microphone into the grain of the wood, ensuring it would pick up even the faintest whisper exchanged near my face. Finally, he integrated a secondary audio receiver into the base of the bedside lamp to capture the ambient noise in the room, making sure Chloe and Brenda would be recorded just as clearly as Jamal. Malik stood by the door, keeping watch and running interference with the nursing staff so Carter could work undisturbed. Valerie sat in the corner chair, drafting the emergency asset freezing orders on her laptop. She was preparing the legal strike to coincide perfectly with the criminal arrests. The plan was a synchronized annihilation. The moment Jamal confessed on tape, Carter would secure the arrest warrants for attempted murder and conspiracy. Simultaneously, Valerie would file the injunctions with the federal court, instantly freezing every single bank account tied to Jamal, Brenda, and Chloe. They would be locked in handcuffs and completely bankrupt before they even understood what had happened. Carter pulled out a secure tablet to test the audiovisual feeds. He held up his hand, signaling us to be quiet. "Check 1, 2, he whispered from the far corner of the room. The audio fed through the tablet with crystal-clear precision. The video feed from the wall clock provided a flawless, wide-angle view of the hospital bed and the surrounding floor space. The snare was officially primed. Carter looked at me, his expression turning deeply serious. "Tasha, this only works if you play your part perfectly. You cannot let your anger show. You cannot lead the witness or accuse him directly, or his defense attorney will claim entrapment or coercion. You have to play the broken, confused victim. You have to let his arrogance do all the heavy lifting. Ask him why he is doing this. Ask him if he ever loved you. Men like Jamal cannot resist bragging when they think they have a captive, helpless audience." "I know exactly how to play him," I replied, my voice steady and completely void of fear. "He thinks I am stupid. He thinks I am a weak, hysterical woman whose brain is melting. I will feed his ego until he chokes on it." Valerie packed her laptop into her leather briefcase and walked over to my bed. She reached out and squeezed my hand tightly. "I am heading back to my office to finalize the filings. I will be ready the absolute second Malik gives me the green light. You are a survivor, Tasha. Tomorrow morning you become the executioner." Carter packed up his tools and gave me a respectful nod before slipping out the door to coordinate the tactical response with his precinct. He and Malik would be monitoring the live feed from a secure room just down the hallway the moment Jamal and his entourage arrived. If things escalated, or if Jamal attempted to physically harm me, Malik and Carter were fully prepared to breach the room in seconds. The heavy reinforced door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the quiet hospital room. The afternoon sun slowly faded into dusk, casting long, dark shadows across the pristine white sheets of my bed. I looked up at the digital wall clock, knowing the invisible eye of the camera was staring right back at me. I spent the entire night mentally rehearsing my performance. I shed the last lingering remnants of the fear that had controlled my life for the past 8 months. I thought about the agonizing pain in my legs, the terrifying dizziness, and the countless tears I had shed believing my own mind was betraying me. I thought about Chloe buying luxury Pilates equipment with the money I had earned working 80-hour weeks. I thought about Brenda standing over my bed and calling me a useless burden. By the time the first light of Thursday morning broke through the hospital window, my heart was beating with a calm, lethal rhythm. The 48-hour window Jamal had arrogantly granted me was up. I smoothed the heavy blankets over my legs, adjusted my hospital gown to look slightly disheveled, and sank deep into the pillows. I let my facial muscles slacken into an expression of total exhaustion. The Ice Queen was locked and loaded. I stared at the heavy wooden door, waiting for my husband to walk in and sign his own life away. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy electronic lock on the secure door beeped. The sound echoed in the quiet room like a starting pistol. The heavy door swung open, and my husband walked in first. Jamal wore a tailored charcoal suit with a crisp crimson tie, looking like a man arriving to collect a lottery check rather than visiting his critically ill wife. He projected an aura of absolute untouchable victory. Brenda marched in right behind him. She wore her signature navy suit and a string of heavy pearls, her face pulled into a tight, judgmental scowl as she scanned the sterile military recovery room. She looked at me with the same unfiltered disgust she reserved for something scraped off the bottom of her shoe. Then came Chloe. She clicked into the room wearing designer beige cashmere and pristine leather heels. Tucked securely under her arm was a brand new woven leather Bottega Veneta handbag. I stared at that bag, recognizing the exact model from the transaction logs I had pulled the night before. It was a $4,000 accessory purchased entirely with the tech stock earnings I had accumulated over 10 grueling years in the corporate sector. Chloe had literally bought it with my stolen blood money. Chloe immediately let out a loud theatrical sigh, waving her manicured hand in front of her face, as if the air in my room was toxic. "This hospital lighting is absolutely draining," she complained, her voice pitching into a whiny, self-centered drone. Fluorescents completely wash out my skin tone. "Jamal, can we please make this quick? I have a contractor meeting at the studio in an hour to approve the imported marble reception desk, and I cannot be late." Brenda patted Chloe on the shoulder, offering her a look of deep maternal sympathy that she had never once directed toward me. "I know, sweetheart," Brenda cooed. "It is terribly depressing in here. We will be out of this miserable place in 5 minutes, and you can get back to your business." Jamal ignored their chatter. His dark eyes locked instantly onto the thick stack of legal documents resting on my hospital tray table. He walked right up to the edge of the bed, planting both of his hands firmly on the mattress. He leaned over me, casting his large shadow across my face, using the exact same physical intimidation tactics he had deployed 48 hours ago. I knew the hidden camera inside the digital wall clock was capturing his every move. I knew the microscopic audio transmitter embedded in the wooden headboard just inches behind my pillows was actively recording the sound of his breathing. The trap was live. Now I just needed to hand them the bait. I initiated the performance. I suppressed every ounce of the fierce, calculating data analyst burning inside my chest and fully embodied the broken, defeated victim they expected to see. I let a violent, erratic tremor take over my hands. I reached out and picked up the silver pen resting next to the divorce settlement agreement, fumbling with it clumsily, so it slipped against my knuckles. I slumped my shoulders inward, making myself look as small and fragile as possible against the stark white hospital pillows. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged, letting my chest heave with fake panic. I tilted my head up to look at Jamal. I widened my eyes, letting them fill with heavy, unshed tears. I allowed a single drop to spill over my eyelashes, tracking a hot line down my cheek. I looked at him with an expression of pure, pathetic desperation. "Jamal, please," I whispered. I deliberately slurred the syllables, mimicking the heavy neurological fog that the thallium poisoning had caused. I read the papers. You are taking the townhouse. You are taking my entire investment portfolio. You are leaving me with nothing but the medical debt. How am I supposed to survive? Jamal did not flinch. His expression remained utterly devoid of warmth or humanity. I am leaving you with your life, Tasha, he said, his voice dropping into a cold, transactional tone. That is more than generous considering the massive financial and emotional burden you have become to this family. Sign the papers right now. Do not make a scene. Do not drag this out. If you hesitate, I will have the transport team move you to the locked psychiatric facility this afternoon. I kept my hands shaking violently. I hovered the silver tip of the pen just millimeters above the signature line on the final page of the asset relinquishment agreement. I let out a loud, shuddering sob, letting my chin drop toward my chest, as if the weight of his cruelty was physically crushing my spirit. From the foot of the bed, Brenda let out a sharp, impatient scoff. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she snapped. "Stop the waterworks, Tasha. There are no cameras in here, and we are not buying the victim act. You are just a bitter, broken woman who cannot handle the fact that my son is moving on to a better, healthier life. You have ruined enough of his time. Just sign the damn papers and disappear." I kept my eyes glued to the signature line, acting as though their words were tearing my heart into pieces. Internally, I was entirely composed. I was counting the seconds, calculating the exact angle I needed to play to get Jamal to open his mouth and brag. I needed him to feel so incredibly powerful, so absolutely victorious, that he would happily dig his own grave on federal surveillance. I tightened my grip on the pen, letting my hand shake so badly that the tip tapped against the premium paper. I looked back up at my husband, making sure my tear-streaked face was positioned perfectly for the hidden camera lens. The stage was set perfectly. The audience of federal investigators was watching from down the hall. I was ready to pull the confession straight from his arrogant throat. I let my bottom lip quiver. I looked up into the cold, dark eyes of the man I had slept next to for 7 years. I forced a wet, ragged gasp into my chest, making sure my shoulders hitched with the effort. "Did you ever love me, Jamal?" I asked, my voice cracking perfectly in the middle of his name. Or was it just to take everything? Jamal stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The silence in the sterile military hospital room was absolute, broken only by the steady artificial rhythm of my heart monitor. Then his chest began to heave. A low chuckle rumbled in his throat, building quickly into a loud, booming laugh. He threw his head back, genuinely amused by my question. "Love," Jamal repeated, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Tasha, you really are losing your mind. You were an acquisition. You were a high-yield asset that started paying fewer and fewer dividends the more arrogant you got." He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. The scent of his expensive cedar cologne suddenly made me want to vomit, but I held my ground. I let my eyes dart around nervously, like a trapped animal feeding his massive ego. "You thought you ran this marriage just because your tech stocks outperformed my investment portfolios," Jamal sneered, his voice dropping into a menacing, venomous whisper. "You thought you could buy that $1 million townhouse and hang it over my head. You emasculated me, Tasha. Every time you talked about your promotions, every time you paid for a vacation, you rubbed my nose in it. So I decided to restructure the household." I let out a soft, pathetic whimper, shrinking back against the headboard, aiming my voice directly toward the embedded microphone hidden in the wood. "Why am I so sick, Jamal?" I sobbed, letting the tears flow freely now. "Why are my legs completely numb? What did you do to me?" He smiled, a wide, terrifying baring of his teeth. The hubris was intoxicating to him. He was standing over his vanquished enemy, completely unable to resist the urge to take a victory lap. "It was almost too easy," Jamal bragged, straightening his posture and adjusting his silk tie. "You were so stressed working those 80-hour weeks. You never even questioned it when I offered to start making your breakfast. You just smiled and drank your protein shake every single morning." He stepped back, gesturing grandly with his hands as if giving a keynote presentation. "A little heavy metal powder goes a long way. Thallium. Completely tasteless. Completely odorless. I literally fed it to you right at our kitchen island, and you thanked me for being such a supportive husband. I watched you swallow it while you read your little financial reports, totally clueless that I was slowly shutting down your nervous system. You poisoned me, I gasped, ensuring the audio picked up the exact confirmation. You tried to kill me. I tried to put you in your proper place, Jamal corrected coldly. I needed you incapacitated so I could get power of attorney. And it worked beautifully. I have liquidated everything you built, Tasha. It is all mine now. From the side of the bed, Brenda stepped forward. She was completely unable to let her son take all the credit for my destruction. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure self-righteous malice. You brought this entirely on yourself, Brenda chimed in, her voice, ringing loud and clear for the federal agents listening down the hall. You were way too independent, strutting around that house like you owned my son. You disrespected the natural order of things. Jamal needed a wife who knew her place, a woman who understood how to support her husband, not compete with him. Brenda leaned over the bed, railing, her eyes flashing with vindictive triumph. I told him months ago that you were a lost cause. I told him to double the dosage so we could be done with your miserable existence. I had to live in that house and pretend to care about your little dizzy spells. I had to listen to you cry in the middle of the night. It was exhausting. You should be grateful we are letting you rot in a psych ward instead of putting you in the ground where you belong. I let a fresh wave of tears spill down my cheeks, wrapping my arms around my stomach as if her words were physically gutting me. I turned my tear-filled eyes toward Chloe. She had been standing near the door, shifting her weight impatiently in her designer heels, looking incredibly bored by my suffering. And you, I whimpered, directing my gaze at the woman who had cried white tears to manipulate my husband against me. I trusted you, Chloe. I let you help with my bank accounts. Why would you do this to me? Chloe rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp, dismissive sigh. She stepped into the center of the room, ensuring she was perfectly framed by the digital wall clock housing the hidden camera lens. She smirked a nasty, entitled expression that completely shattered her sweet, innocent facade. Oh, please, Tasha, Chloe sneered. She reached up to affectionately pat the woven leather of her brand new Bottega Veneta bag. Do not act like you actually cared about me. You were always so smug, acting like your tech money made you superior to everyone else in this family. Well, guess who has your tech money now? She laughed, a high-pitched grating sound that made my blood boil. Thanks for the studio, by the way. Setting up those shell companies with Jamal was the smartest business move I ever made. We siphoned off $400,000 right under your nose while you were too busy vomiting to check your portfolio. Chloe struck a pose, running a hand down her expensive cashmere sweater. Your money looks much better on me anyway. I'm going to build a luxury wellness empire with the cash you bled for, and you are going to spend the rest of your life eating Jell-O in a padded room. So really, you should just sign the papers and get it over with so I can get back to my interior designer. I sat there absorbing every single word. My mind categorized the data with lethal precision. They had just handed me a golden platter of federal crimes. Jamal had explicitly confessed to administering thallium, establishing attempted murder and grievous bodily harm. Brenda had confessed to conspiracy and aiding in the poisoning, outlining her motive of malice and control. Chloe had explicitly confessed to wire fraud, grand larceny, and money laundering, detailing the exact amount stolen and the method used to hide it. They had meticulously outlined their entire criminal enterprise on high-definition audio and video. They had left absolutely no room for interpretation, no room for highly paid defense lawyers to claim it was a misunderstanding, and no room for a judge to show them a single ounce of leniency. My heart hammered against my ribs, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of absolute, undeniable victory. The performance had worked flawlessly. Their astronomical hubris had blinded them to the reality of the situation. They were so desperate to gloat, so eager to twist the knife into a woman they believed was completely broken, that they had willingly marched into a federal trap and locked the door behind themselves. I looked down at the divorce settlement papers resting on my lap. The silver pen Jamal had tossed at me sat gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. I had everything I needed. The bait had been swallowed whole. The tears stopped. I blinked once, clearing the final drop of salt water from my eyelashes. I took a slow, deep breath of the sterile hospital air, letting it fill my lungs and steady my racing heart. The violent, pathetic trembling in my fingers ceased instantly. I uncurled my spine, pushing myself off the thin pillows, and sat up perfectly straight against the wooden headboard. I picked up the silver pen Jamal had tossed onto the divorce papers. I did not hover it over the signature line. Instead, I held it up in the harsh fluorescent light, turning it slowly between my completely steady fingers. I looked down at the heavy legal documents, the paperwork designed to strip away my entire life, and then I simply opened my hand. The pen dropped. It hit the metal tray table with a sharp, definitive clatter that rang out like a gunshot in the quiet room. I looked up, locking my eyes directly onto Jamal. The arrogant, victorious smirk was still plastered across his face, but as his brain tried to process the sudden radical change in my posture, the corners of his mouth began to twitch. The slurred, fragile whimper evaporated from my throat. When I spoke, my voice was steady, cold, and absolutely lethal. "You really thought I was stupid, Jamal?" I said, the words slicing through the heavy tension. "You thought because you wore expensive suits and threw around investment banking terminology that you were the smartest person in the room." Jamal took a hesitant step backward, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. The performance had shifted so rapidly that his arrogant mind could not compute the data. "Tasha," he stammered, his voice losing its sharp edge. "What are you doing? Sign the papers." Brenda frowned, stepping closer to the bed, her face twisting with irritation. "Stop playing games, girl," she snapped. "You are making a fool of yourself." Chloe crossed her arms, clutching her stolen designer bag tightly against her chest. "She is literally having a psychotic break right now," Chloe said, rolling her pale blue eyes. "Just call the psychiatric transport team, Jamal. Let them drag her out of here so we can leave." A psychotic break. I repeated, my tone dripping with absolute ice. "Is that what you call a senior data analyst tracing $400,000 of stolen tech stock earnings through 7 different shell companies straight to a commercial lease in Buckhead?" Chloe gasped. The sound was sharp and violent, as if all the oxygen had just been sucked out of the room. The color instantly vanished from her face, leaving her skin a sickly, translucent gray. She looked like she had just been slapped across the mouth. Brenda froze, her eyes widening in pure shock as her jaw dropped open. I turned my lethal gaze back to my husband. "And you," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Did you really think a former military contractor would not know how to run a bypass on an encrypted cloud server? Did you honestly believe I would not find the toxicology report confirming thallium poisoning? You used a heavy metal, Jamal. You left a digital and biological trail so bright it could be seen from space." Jamal's chest started heaving, but not with laughter this time. It was pure, unadulterated panic. His perfectly composed facade shattered completely. He looked around the sterile recovery room as if suddenly realizing the walls were closing in on him. "How do you know that?" Jamal whispered, his voice stripped of all its former power, cracking under the weight of his sudden terror. "You have been confined to a bed for months. You have no access to your banking portals. Your phone was confiscated." I allowed the ghost of a smile to play on my lips. It was a cold, predatory expression, the smile of an executioner watching the trap spring shut. I did not answer his question. I did not need to explain my methods to a dead man walking. Instead, I looked straight past Jamal, fixing my eyes directly on the digital wall clock mounted at the foot of my bed. I knew the high-definition camera lens hidden behind the glass was broadcasting my face in perfect resolution. I raised my voice, ensuring it carried flawlessly to the directional microphones embedded in the wood right behind my head. "Did you guys get all of that?" I asked loudly. The silence that followed was absolute. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody in the room dared to breathe. Jamal slowly turned his head to follow my line of sight. He stared at the digital clock. His eyes darted to the bedside lamp. He looked back at me, his dark eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost beautiful to witness. The realization hit them like a speeding freight train. They had not just confessed to me. They had confessed to an unseen audience. Chloe physically stumbled, Her hands began to shake so violently that she lost her grip on the woven leather handbag. It hit the linoleum floor, spilling her designer lipstick, her keys, and her phone across the tiles. She did not even try to pick it up. She brought her trembling hands to her mouth, letting out a stifled, high-pitched whimper. Brenda clutched her heavy pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap under the pressure. Her authoritative, domineering posture crumbled entirely. She suddenly looked exactly like what she was, a frail, terrified, greedy woman caught in a trap she had helped build. Jamal stumbled backward, his legs suddenly failing him the exact way mine had failed me in the Fulton County courthouse. He hit the solid wall, his breathing ragged and shallow, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked jerks. He stared at me like I was a ghost. "Who are you talking to?" Jamal demanded, his voice pitching into a hysterical shout. "Tasha, who are you talking to?" I did not answer him. I just sat there in my hospital bed, perfectly still, perfectly calm, watching the three of them suffocate on their own catastrophic hubris. I had given them enough rope to hang themselves, and they had eagerly, gleefully tied the noose around their own necks. Now, all I had to do was wait for the trapdoor to open. The heavy, solid door of the adjoining hospital bathroom clicked unlocked. The sound cut through the panicked silence of my recovery room like a cracking whip. The door swung wide open, hitting the rubber wall stop with a dull thud. Detective Carter stepped out first. He was holding a digital audio receiver in his left hand, the green recording light blinking steadily in the dim hospital lighting. In his right hand, he held his gold police badge, flashing it directly at my husband. Right behind him, moving with the silent, predatory grace of a soldier entering a combat zone, was Major Malik Sterling. He stepped into the room and crossed his muscular arms over his broad chest. His dark eyes locked onto Jamal with a lethal, unblinking intensity that seemed to suck the remaining oxygen straight out of the air. Jamal let out a choked, guttural sound. He scrambled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the polished linoleum floor until his spine slammed hard against the wall. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The charismatic, untouchable investment banker who had just bragged about methodically poisoning his wife was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, trembling coward whose perfectly tailored suit suddenly looked 3 sizes too big. Chloe shrieked. It was a sharp, piercing sound of pure terror. She dropped to her knees, abandoning her stolen designer handbag completely. She pressed her hands against her face, her chest heaving as she hyperventilated. The fake, weaponized tears she had used to manipulate my family for years were replaced by genuine, uncontrollable panic. She looked up at Detective Carter, her pale eyes wide with horror, realizing that crying would not save her from federal wire fraud charges. Brenda stood absolutely frozen. Her hands were still clutched around her heavy pearl necklace, her knuckles white from the strain. The domineering, cruel matriarch who had commanded me to sign away my life just minutes ago looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Her jaw hung slack, her eyes darting frantically from the police detective to the military officer and finally back to me sitting perfectly upright in my bed. Detective Carter took a slow, deliberate step into the center of the room. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice was calm, authoritative, and laced with absolute certainty. Jamal Sterling Carter stated, reading from a small notepad he pulled from his jacket pocket. You have just confessed on high-definition audio and video to the administration of a lethal toxin, attempted murder, and criminal conspiracy. Brenda Sterling and Chloe Sterling, you have both explicitly confessed to aiding in a murder plot, grand larceny, and wire fraud. Carter reached around to his belt. The metallic clink of heavy steel handcuffs echoed in the room. He unholstered them, the metal catching the harsh fluorescent light. You are all completely surrounded, Carter continued, taking another step toward my husband. I have federal agents standing by, and I am taking you into custody right now. Jamal held his hands up, pressing his palms flat against the wall, as if trying to push his way through the solid drywall. He was sweating profusely, the moisture beading on his forehead and dripping down his neck, ruining his crisp silk tie. Wait, Jamal stammered, his voice cracking into a high pitch. This is a mistake. We were joking. We were just saying things to get a reaction out of her. You cannot arrest us for a joke. Major Sterling took a single menacing step forward. We have your poison isolated in her bloodstream. Jamal Malik rumbled, his voice dark and dangerous. We have the financial routing numbers matching the exact dates of her physical decline. Do not insult our intelligence. Carter moved to grab Jamal's wrist. The snare was closing. The arrest was seconds away. But I did not want it to end here. Wait, I commanded. My voice rang out clear and sharp, cutting through the chaos in the room. Detective Carter paused, looking back at me over his shoulder with a questioning frown. Malik remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving Jamal, but he respected my authority. I had orchestrated this entire operation, and they were trusting my lead. I looked at the three people cowering by the door. Arresting them in a quiet, sterile hospital room felt entirely too private. It felt like an easy way out. Jamal had not poisoned me in private. He had publicly humiliated me. He had dragged my name through the mud in front of our extended family, my friends, and my professional colleagues. He had stood in the Fulton County Courthouse wearing his custom suit and proudly told a judge that I was a hysterical, mentally unstable burden. He had used the legal system to strip away my dignity. I was not going to let him go quietly into the back of an unmarked police cruiser. I want the indictment sealed, I told Detective Carter, keeping my eyes locked on my husband. I do not want them arrested today. Carter turned fully toward me, his brow furrowed in deep concern. Tasha, they just confessed to attempting to take your life. If we let them walk out of this hospital, they are a massive flight risk. They will destroy evidence and run. They cannot run anywhere, I replied smoothly, allowing a cold, predatory smile to spread across my face. I looked directly at Chloe, who was still weeping on the floor, and then at Jamal. My divorce attorney Valerie is currently filing emergency injunctions with the federal court. By the time you three make it to the hospital parking garage, every single bank account tied to your names will be frozen. Your credit cards will be declined. The commercial lease for that luxury Pilates studio has already been flagged for asset forfeiture. Your passports have been flagged by federal authorities. You cannot buy a plane ticket, you cannot rent a car, and you cannot access a single dollar of my money. You are completely broke and entirely trapped. Jamal stared at me, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked jerks. He realized the sheer magnitude of the web I had woven around him. I want to do this on the public record. I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. I want to do it in exactly 2 weeks at our scheduled asset division hearing. I want Jamal to stand in front of Judge Reynolds, the very man he tried to manipulate, and I want the entire court to watch this tape. I leaned forward, making sure my husband felt the full crushing weight of his impending destruction. You are going to leave this hospital today, Jamal. You are going to go back to the townhouse you tried to steal from me. You are going to spend the next 14 days living in absolute suffocating terror. You are going to wake up every single morning knowing that federal agents are watching your house, monitoring your phones, and waiting for the gavel to fall. I shifted my gaze to Brenda, whose face was completely drained of blood. You are going to watch your perfect social reputation evaporate. And when the hearing date arrives, you are all going to put on your best outfits and walk willingly into that courtroom. Because if you do not show up, Detective Carter will issue a nationwide manhunt, and you will spend the rest of your pathetic lives sleeping in holding cells. Carter looked at me, a profound respect shining in his eyes. He slowly holstered his handcuffs and turned back to the trembling family by the door. You heard her, Carter said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. Hand over your passports and your cell phones right now. You are under 24-hour federal surveillance. If you attempt to contact Tasha, if you try to cross state lines, or if you even think about missing that court date, I will drag you out of your beds in the middle of the night. Chloe sobbed hysterically as she dug her phone out of her pocket and handed it to the detective. Jamal moved like a machine, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his phone twice before finally surrendering it. Brenda handed over her device without a word, her eyes staring blankly ahead, her spirit completely broken. Get out of my room, I commanded. Major Sterling stepped aside, leaving a narrow path to the hallway. Jamal, Brenda, and Chloe scrambled through the door, desperate to escape the suffocating pressure of the trap they had walked into. The heavy, reinforced door clicked shut behind them, locking them out of my life forever. The bait had been taken, the snare was set, and the countdown to their public annihilation had officially begun. The 14 days of waiting broke them exactly as I knew it would. I walked through the heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse precisely 2 weeks later. The air smelled exactly the same, a mix of lemon floor wax and old paper, but the power dynamic in the room had completely inverted. I did not stumble. I did not shake. My body had entirely purged the heavy metals and my mind was razor sharp. I wore a tailored crimson-red power suit that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor with absolute unwavering authority. Jamal was already sitting at the plaintiff table. He looked entirely different from the arrogant investment banker who had confidently smirked at me during our last hearing. His bespoke suit hung loosely on his depleted frame. He was sweating profusely, repeatedly dabbing his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. He looked like a man who had not slept a single hour in 2 weeks, entirely consumed by the suffocating paranoia of federal surveillance. Brenda sat in the gallery behind him, staring straight ahead, her face pale and drawn. Chloe sat 2 rows back, chewing aggressively on her fingernails, her designer wardrobe replaced by a drab, muted dress that offered no comfort. Judge Reynolds called the court to order, banging his gavel. He looked down at his docket, then looked over at my table. His eyes widened slightly as he took in my healthy, commanding appearance. "Counsel, Judge Reynolds," said, addressing Jamal's lawyer. "At our last hearing, you requested an emergency injunction to seize the assets of Mrs. Sterling due to severe cognitive decline. I must say the respondent looks remarkably well today." Jamal's lawyer swallowed hard, looking at his client with obvious discomfort. Jamal had clearly not told his attorney about the hospital ambush or the frozen bank accounts. The man was walking blindly into a slaughter. Valerie stood up, smoothing the front of her pristine white blazer. "Your Honor, my client is in excellent health because she is no longer being actively poisoned by the plaintiff." The courtroom erupted into a chaotic murmur. Judge Reynolds slammed his gavel, demanding order. "Excuse me, counselor," he barked, his face tightening with shock. "That is a massive accusation to bring into a civil asset hearing. We have brought the receipts." "Your Honor," Valerie replied smoothly. She did not miss a beat. She called Major Malik Sterling to the stand. Malik marched up to the witness box in his full military dress uniform, radiating absolute credibility and stoic authority. He swore the oath, and then presented the certified military toxicology reports directly to the bailiff, who handed them to the judge. Malik explained the thallium poisoning with clinical, devastating precision. He detailed how the heavy metal was deliberately administered to mimic a degenerative neurological disease, matching my exact physical symptoms perfectly. He explained the dosage, the method of delivery, and the resulting cardiovascular distress. Jamal buried his face in his hands. Brenda closed her eyes, shrinking down in the gallery benches. Jamal's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the heavy mahogany table and disappear. He pushed his chair back, physically distancing himself from his own client. Valerie then requested permission to submit audiovisual evidence to support the medical findings. Judge Reynolds, visibly disturbed by the toxicology report in his hands, granted it immediately. The court technician linked a secure drive to the large monitors mounted on the courtroom walls. The hidden camera footage from my hospital room began to play. The audio was flawless, piped directly through the courtroom speakers. The entire room watched as Jamal leaned over my hospital bed, his massive shadow falling across my supposedly broken body. They heard him bragging, his voice filled with venomous pride about slipping tasteless powder into my daily protein shakes. The courtroom listened in horrified silence as Brenda stepped into the frame, calling me a useless burden and demanding a double dosage so they could clear out my home office for Chloe. They heard Chloe laughing, adjusting her stolen designer bag, bragging about using my hard-earned tech money to buy imported marble for her Pilates studio. The sound of Jamal's cruel, arrogant laughter echoed off the mahogany walls. It was a surreal, chilling experience to watch them orchestrate my murder in high definition. They had handed the court an airtight, heavily documented confession of their sheer malice. They had sealed their own fate in front of the exact judge they had tried to manipulate into robbing me. When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. No one moved. The court reporter sat with her hands frozen above her keyboard. The bailiffs stood perfectly still, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. I sat at the defense table, my back perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I looked over at Jamal. He was staring at the floor, a broken, shattered man who finally realized there was absolutely no escape from the trap he had built for himself. He had tried to bury a senior data analyst, failing to realize that I would simply map the dirt, calculate the trajectory, and bury him alive in his own hubris. The crushing silence in the courtroom was finally shattered by the sound of solid wood slamming violently against wood. Judge Reynolds struck his gavel with such immense force that the heavy brass nameplate on his desk rattled and shifted out of place. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The veins in his neck strained visibly against his collar as he glared down at the plaintiff table, looking at my husband as if he were a diseased insect. "Mr. Sterling!" Judge Reynolds boomed, his voice shaking the heavy mahogany fixtures of the room. "You sat in my courtroom 2 weeks ago and looked me dead in the eye. You used the absolute sanctity of this legal institution to facilitate a cold-blooded, calculated assassination attempt against your own wife. You brought forged narratives into my court. You tried to weaponize my gavel to rob a dying woman while you actively administered the poison yourself." Jamal flinched, as if he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. He opened his mouth, perhaps to utter some pathetic, desperate apology, or another hollow lie, but his own attorney violently grabbed his forearm, silently demanding he shut up. The attorney was pale, shaking, and actively pushing his leather chair further down the table to put maximum physical distance between himself and his toxic client. "I am denying your emergency injunction for asset seizure with extreme prejudice." Judge Reynolds declared, his voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. "I am striking down every single motion filed by the plaintiff in this case. Furthermore, I am granting an immediate and permanent restraining order against Jamal Sterling, Brenda Sterling, and Chloe Sterling." The judge did not stop there. His eyes burned with righteous indignation as he looked past the defense tables to the back of the courtroom. He gave a sharp, definitive nod. The heavy oak doors swung open with a resounding crash. Detective Carter marched in, his gold badge clipped prominently to his belt. He was followed immediately by 6 uniformed Fulton County Sheriff deputies and 2 federal agents in tactical gear. The sound of their heavy boots hitting the polished hardwood floor signaled the absolute, undeniable end of Jamal's reign. "Take them into custody," Judge Reynolds commanded, pointing a rigid, unwavering finger at the plaintiff table. The deputies moved with swift, tactical precision, swarming the room. 2 heavily built officers grabbed Jamal by his shoulders, hauling him out of his chair so fast his knees buckled beneath him. They slammed him face first against the heavy wooden table, ruining the lapels of his custom Tom Ford suit. They violently pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. Jamal did not fight. He did not scream. He simply wept, his tears falling onto the polished wood as the officers read him his Miranda rights for attempted murder, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. In the gallery, chaos erupted. Brenda shrieked in absolute horror as 2 deputies flanked her. She tried to swat them away, her heavy pearl necklace swinging wildly as she clung desperately to her crumbling superiority. "Do not touch me!" she yelled, her voice pitching into a hysterical, ugly screech. "I am a respected member of this community. I did not do anything wrong. She is the one destroying this family. Get your hands off my suit." The deputies were utterly unimpressed by her socialite demands. They yanked her arms backwards, snapping the steel cuffs onto her wrists with forceful, unapologetic efficiency. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and grand larceny," a deputy stated coldly, physically dragging her out of the wooden pew. Brenda's legs gave out from the shock and they had to carry her down the aisle, her expensive navy suit riding up as she sobbed in pure public humiliation. Then there was Chloe. As the federal agents approached her row, Chloe immediately resorted to her ultimate heavily practiced defense mechanism. She threw her hands over her face, collapsing into a heap on the wooden bench. The heavy theatrical sobbing began instantly. She hyperventilated, forcing loud, fragile gasps of air into her lungs, weaponizing her tears exactly as she had done in my kitchen months ago. "Please!" Chloe wailed, looking up at the federal agents with wide, terrified eyes. "I did not know what they were doing. I am just a victim. Jamal and Brenda manipulated me. I was just trying to help my family. I did not want anyone to get hurt. Please, you have to believe me." She fought the handcuffs, twisting her body and reaching her bound hands out toward the bench, directing her performance at the one person she thought she could manipulate. "Your Honor," Chloe cried out, her voice trembling with perfect, calculated fragility. "I am a good person. I am a fragile woman caught in the middle. Please do not let them take me to a cell." Judge Reynolds leaned forward over his elevated desk. He looked down at the sobbing, trembling woman in the gallery. He did not see a fragile victim. Thanks to the high-definition video playing on the monitors just moments ago, he saw the greedy, malicious fraudster who had openly laughed about buying imported marble with a poisoned woman's stolen tech earnings. Judge Reynolds stared at her with pure, unfiltered disgust, entirely immune to her performance. "Save your tears for the federal prosecutor, ma'am," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute disdain. "You are going to need them." The federal agents hauled Chloe to her feet, ignoring her hysterical, breathless protests as they read her federal charges for money laundering, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. She thrashed and kicked her beige cashmere sweater, tearing slightly, as they dragged her out of the courtroom right behind her screaming mother-in-law. I stood up from the defense table. I smoothed the front of my crimson suit, my posture impeccable, and watched the deputies march Jamal down the center aisle. As he passed my table, the officers paused for just a second. Jamal lifted his head. His eyes met mine one final time. They were hollow, terrified, and completely stripped of the arrogant investment banker who thought he could outsmart a senior data analyst. He looked at the woman he had tried to bury, finally realizing that I was the one holding the shovel. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, sealing his fate forever. The courtroom fell silent once more, but the air was no longer heavy and suffocating. It was crisp, clean, and entirely mine. The fallout from that morning in Fulton County was swift, brutal, and flawlessly executed. The justice system, armed with high-definition audiovisual confessions and certified military medical records, did not offer a single shred of mercy to the people who had tried to bury me. Jamal faced a merciless trial. His high-priced defense attorneys tried to negotiate a plea deal, scrambling to save whatever was left of his life. But the prosecution flatly refused to entertain any leniency. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the slightest possibility of early parole. The charismatic investment banker who once stood in my kitchen bragging about restructuring our household was permanently reduced to a federal inmate number. He was stripped of his bespoke suits, his lucrative career, and his arrogant delusions of grandeur, locked away in a concrete box where his manipulative charm meant absolutely nothing. Brenda did not fare any better. She was sentenced to 10 years for her active participation in the conspiracy and her complete lack of remorse. The destruction of her legal freedom was matched only by the spectacular annihilation of her social standing. The pristine, untouchable reputation she had meticulously built within the wealthy Atlanta social scene evaporated overnight. Her name became a toxic, whispered cautionary tale of extreme greed and malice. The exclusive country clubs immediately revoked her memberships, and the elite committees she once ruled with an iron fist publicly denounced her. She was left entirely isolated, forced to trade her heavy pearl necklaces and tailored navy suits for a standard-issue prison uniform. Chloe learned the hardest lesson of all. She discovered that weaponized tears hold absolutely no currency against a federal prosecutor holding a mountain of digital evidence. The government moved with blinding speed, immediately seizing the commercial lease for her luxury wellness center. Every imported Italian reformer machine, every piece of custom marble, and every organic smoothie blender bought with my stolen tech earnings was seized and liquidated by federal agents to repay the embezzled funds. To make matters worse for her, her husband Trey filed for divorce the very instant the grand jury indictments were unsealed. He was desperate to shield his own assets from the catastrophic fallout, leaving Chloe to face her sentencing completely alone. She sobbed uncontrollably as the judge handed down an 8-year prison sentence for money laundering and criminal conspiracy. Her fragile victim facade was permanently shattered. While they were being processed into the federal prison system, my attorney Valerie systematically dismantled what remained of Jamal's life in civil court. The divorce proceedings were not just a legal victory, they were an absolute massacre. The judge awarded me 100% of our marital assets without a second thought. I retained sole undisputed ownership of the Atlanta townhouse, and I immediately hired a crew to gut and renovate the spaces they had occupied, erasing their toxic presence from my sanctuary forever. My entire tech stock portfolio was fully recovered with interest and legally secured. Furthermore, the court awarded me massive punitive damages, draining every last cent of Jamal's remaining liquid capital to compensate for the extreme emotional and physical distress he had inflicted. I did not just survive their calculated plot to put me in the ground. I systematically claimed their entire futures. I took back every single dollar they stole, reclaimed my physical health, and banished them to cages where they would spend the next decade remembering the exact moment they underestimated the woman they thought they could break. 6 months have passed since the courtroom doors closed on my past. Tonight, I am sitting at a candlelit table in one of the most exclusive restaurants in Buckhead, savoring a flawless meal and the crisp, clean taste of vintage wine. My physical recovery is absolute. The terrifying numbness in my legs and the heavy brain fog are nothing but distant memories. I am glowing, completely detoxed and back in my absolute prime. I am commanding my data analytics division with a sharper edge than ever before, earning record bonuses that go into accounts solely controlled by me. I take a sip of my wine and look across the table. Major Malik Sterling is sitting opposite me. He is not wearing his tactical gear or his dress uniform tonight, but a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit that highlights his broad shoulders. He smiles at me, a genuine, warm expression that actually reaches his dark eyes. When we finish our dinner, we walk out together into the warm Atlanta night. Malik places a firm, protective hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward his car. There is no manipulation here, no hidden agendas, and no fragile egos to coddle. It is simply the beautiful beginning of a healthy, fiercely protected romance built on a foundation of absolute trust and mutual respect. I stop for a moment under the glowing streetlights and turn to look directly at you. The most profound lesson from this story is that your intuition and intellect are your greatest protectors. When toxic people attempt to gaslight you into doubting your own reality, you must hold fast to the truth. Tasha did not let her physical weakness break her sharp mind. Instead of reacting with immediate emotional anger, she calculated her moves, gathered undeniable evidence, and weaponized her enemy's arrogance against them. Her journey teaches us that true power lies in patience, meticulous documentation, and unshakable self-belief. You owe zero loyalty to anyone who exploits your vulnerability. You owe it to yourself to fight. If you have ever found the courage to expose a manipulator and reclaim your life, share your story in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering journeys of survival and justice.